Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Habitus. My name's Michael Pattison. I'm here once again with my co-host,
Bobby Lowe.
Follow us on Twitter at habituspod. We're on Stitcher, TuneIn, SoundCloud, iTunes, all the rest of it. And we have 5 films to discuss today. Bobby's picked 2. Bobby, what you got for me?
I've got 1963's epic fantasy Jason and the Argonauts, directed by Don Chaffee. And I've got 1983's belated sequel, Psycho 2, directed by Richard Franklin. And
great.
What are your highbrow picks for this week?
Highbrow picks. So I guess is it highbrow? I guess it kind of is. We'll get to it. But 2005's A History of Violence by David Cronenberg, and also, yeah, I guess this is highbrow. 2014's Phoenix by Christian Petzold.
Right.
But before then, we have Avengers: Infinity War.
In time, you will know what it's like to lose. Dread it, run from it. The end is near.
We got one advantage. We have what Thanos wants. So that's what we use.
I think it's good, except it sucks. So let me do the plan, and that way it might be really good.
Wow.
Today we don't fight for one life. We fight for all of them.
Groot, put that thing away. Now, I don't want to tell you again. Groot.
Hey, Groot.
Whoa! Language!
So Avengers: Infinity War, directed by Anthony Russo and Joe Russo, produced by Kevin Feige, screenplay by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, based on, of course, The Avengers by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Produced by Marvel Studios, distributed by, as ever, Walt Disney Studios and Motion Pictures. An unprecedented running time for the franchise of 149 minutes. Its budget was somewhere between $300 to $400 million, and obviously box office at the time of recording, days after its release, is not known yet, and I don't want to commit to something.
This story just came out. It just broke the Star Wars record. It just broke the Star Wars record.
Which is, sorry? So what?
The Star Wars record was 248 million domestic opening weekend, and Avengers. I mean, these are Sunday estimates, and the actuals will be tomorrow, so it's 250.
Wow!
So it just broke it. It's also the highest opening weekend globally, 630 million.
To which, how much did you pay for your ticket?
I got it free.
Oh, you got it free. So you'll be going to see it again, of course.
Of course.
I paid also for. I also got it for free. Well, actually, it's not free because I got it. I went to see it at Cineworld, and I pay a monthly pass for Cineworld. So, in like, how many times have I been to the cinema this month? Twice. So I paid $17.90 divided by 2. I paid that for it. So. Yeah, so we're doing a bit anyway. So there's a lot of pressure then to sort of, because a lot of people have seen this, obviously, and a lot of people know the characters and they know the plots and they know the storylines and what's at stake inside out, I imagine. So
yeah.
there's a lot of pressure to get the synopsis right.
So let's just say at the outset that this is going to be a full spoiler discussion.
Absolutely.
So if you haven't seen the film, we're going to be going straight. There's going to be spoilers in this imminent plot synopsis.
Yes,
and also, let's say that neither of us are comic book fans, so we really don't know what we're talking about.
We really don't know what we're talking about outside of this film. There's also probably going to be spoilers in due course of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, henceforth referred to as the MCU. Did I do that right? Did I get that right?
Perfect.
Okay. I don't mean to sound derisive, by the way. This is very exciting for me to discuss this, having seen 11 of the previous 18 movies in the MCU in the last 3 days. I feel very sort of honoured and proud and privileged to be discussing Avengers.
Yeah, so you're going to have a different perspective on this, because I've seen all the films as well, but I saw them as they came out over the past 10 years. And you saw them all over the. You did what takes the average man 10 years in 3 days.
Well, you can do that when you've got a time stone, though, can't you? Right. Synopsis. Who's going to do it, me or you? I guess it's going to be me.
It's going to be you.
Okay. So following, let's try and get this, because there's a lot of plot to cover in the film. Following the events of Thor Ragnarok, the most previous film bar one in the MCU, Thanos, a giant, evil, purple alien. Well, he's not giant. He's bigger. He's kind of twice the size as humans, I'd say. Thanos has boarded the Asgardian. I don't know what his color of his skin has anything to do with it. Nothing against Thanos. But anyway, Thanos has boarded the Asgardian ship carrying Thor and Loki and a few others, last seen from Thor Ragnarok, to Earth. They're going to Earth. They're on their way there. And Thanos has already acquired the Power Stone, one of 6 Infinity Stones, which will allow him to destroy and control the universe as he sees fit. And in his quest to acquire another stone, the Space Stone, he has boarded this ship. So he kills Loki, Thor's brother. He leaves Thor for dead, and sends 2 of his underlings to Earth. Or 4 of his underlings to Earth, sorry. 2 of whom go to New York City to find the Time Stone from Doctor Strange, and 2 of whom go to Scotland in Edinburgh. Well, it's Edinburgh, but it's only referred to as Scotland in the film. And they're going to find the Mind Stone and retrieve it from Vision, who's there with Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch. Events in New York bring together Bruce Banner, Doctor Strange, and Tony Stark, or Iron Man, while events in Scotland bring back Captain America, Sam Wilson, or the Falcon, and Black Widow to help Wanda and Vision thwart their threat. Now, meanwhile, back in space, the Guardians of the Galaxy respond to a distress call received from Thor's ship sent before Thanos boarded it. They rescue Thor, and then Thor and Rocket go to get a new hammer made for Thor. While the Guardians travel to Titan, Thanos' home planet, to rescue Gamora, the adopted daughter of Thanos, who Thanos has abducted once again. On Titan, the Guardians encounter Tony Stark and Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man also, while Thanos himself goes to another planet, Vomia, with Gamora to retrieve the Soul Stone. Lots of stones. Do you think that's a sufficient premise of the film?
Did you cover all the stones?
Space. In the course of abducting Gamora, Thanos also acquires the Reality Stone
from the Collector.
Reality from the Collector, played by not by Jim Jarmusch, but by Benicio del Toro. So Soul, Time, Mind. Yeah, Mind Stone's Vision. Time Stone's Doctor Strange. Soul Stone is located on Vomia. The Reality Stone, the Collector had, and Space Stone is offered by Loki at the beginning of the film.
Would you say, in a nutshell, it would be fair to say that the plot of the film is all of the characters are running around after various MacGuffins?
I guess so. I mean, the stones have
would you classify the stones as MacGuffins, though?
Well, they have been referred to as such in previous films.
Yeah. In previous films?
Like, not in previous literature about the other film.
Okay.
Imagine. I mean, if Deadpool was in this universe, I think Deadpool would be referring to them as such.
Because the stricter, it's a little bit of an elastic thing, because like the stricter Hitchcockian definition of the MacGuffin is that he said it was the thing that the spies want, but the audience don't care.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the question for me, is like, well, are we supposed to care? Because other thing, because George Lucas's version of the MacGuffin is that the audience should care. That the characters are all running around trying to get this powerful sort of fetish object, and they obviously care, and it's driving their motivations, and in their world it's the most important thing. But it should be equally as important as, you know, the character relationships, characterization, and so on. I think that's probably the approach taken here is closer to Lucas than Hitchcock. I don't think it's supposed to be sort of like the microfilm that the spies all want to get, or something like that, where you don't really need to know, or like the briefcase in Ronin or something like that, where you don't even know what the contents of it are, that kind of thing. And if that's the case, which I think it probably is, that's one of the major reasons that the film doesn't really work for me, is because I just don't care.
Yeah, you see, it's a weird one, because this is the film, it's the culmination of what is now, it's the 19th film in this franchise. It's the culmination of what it's been leading to the previous 18 films, through teasers and
the culmination of the past 3 days of your life.
Yes, I mean, I've condensed 10 years or 11 years into 3 or 4 days. But it's so everything sort of merges in such a way that they suddenly have a narrative importance that they previously didn't. The Stones,
sure, yeah, they were kind of Easter eggs.
That, and even in post-credit scenes they show up, and they were MacGuffins in previous films, I think, because their powers were never really.
Were they though? Even
hinted at,
like they were hinted at, but they were never the thing driving the plot in the previous films.
No, that's what I mean.
It's or were they? Maybe I'm misremembering, but I don't remember them ever being as central to any of the previous films as they are in this.
I mean, there's the.
I mean, no, actually, that's not true. People do fight over them, and
Vision gets the Mind Stone as a result of the events in Age of Ultron. The Space Stone is a massive part of the Thor movie, and
sure.
The Power Stone is also in Guardians of the Galaxy.
I mean, your memory of these films is going to be a lot sharper than mine, because I haven't.
I mean, I feel like I've already made a mistake when I said the Tesseract or Space Stone was a large part of Thor, because it's in Avengers. It's a big
part of.
In New York.
The Tesseract is, you see that first in Captain America 1, right?
Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, while we're on the subject of Captain America 1, and now that we're in full spoilers here.
Yeah.
Red Skull's appearance in this movie was spoiled for me by IGN hours before I saw the film. And I wasn't even like, I was, the way when you go on the Google app on your phone now, it has selected news stories underneath the search field.
Yeah.
One of them was just an IGN article, and the headline was, "How did Red Skull show up in Avengers Infinity War?" I was like, what the fuck? I clicked on the article, and then underneath the headline it said, "Beware, spoilers in this article."
Unbelievable, innit? It's really unbelievable, that.
It's weird. So I knew that he was going to show up. I don't really understand his appearance in it, though. Do you?
Not really, no.
I was trying to remember what happened to him at the end of the first Avenger, but I don't know. I haven't seen that since 2011, so I didn't really get what was going on. He's like this mystical wraith who's sort of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, he's now the guardian of the Soul Stone or something?
Yeah. Who explains how you acquire it to Thanos. Just
sure.
So the only way to get it is to make a sacrifice and throw somebody down this well. It's a good job Thanos brought somebody with him, wasn't it? Somebody who was close to him emotionally as well. Anyway, I think I mean, so the Stones have a certain narrative import here, because I suppose the villain's strength gets stronger as the film progresses because of his acquisition of more and of these stones.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Sure.
So it has there's a certain forward moving motion to this that the other previous films surrounding the stones don't have, because obviously the heroes here have to prevent him from getting the stones.
Right, it's effectively a ticking clock.
Yes. And obviously, so everyone's sort of, because of the events in Captain America Civil War, the Avengers have virtually split up.
Yeah.
And, they're not in direct communication with one another, or Stark and Stephen Rogers aren't anyway. And so the first part of the film is they have to then be brought together by certain means. And it's actually Banner who picks up Tony Stark's phone after the New York attack, and Stark and Doctor Strange and Spider-Man are on the alien ship going, above the Earth's atmosphere into space against their own sort of intentions, I suppose. And Banner's the one who phones Steve Rogers and says, look, alerts him to the threat. Well, I don't know what he says because we don't actually hear the phone call. But Roger super quickly gets to Scotland to help out Wanda and Vision. And he's grown a beard. He's grown a nice beard, hasn't he?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So
that's the first part of the film. It's just
okay. So you did a good job synopsizing the setup. So where it ultimately ends up for our third act is that we have one group of Avengers in Wakanda. We have another group of Avengers on Titan, on Thanos' homeworld. And then we also have Thor and Rocket performing kind of like narrative busy work, going to get a new hammer, or that turns out to be an axe. I can't remember why. Yeah. And then that's supposed to kill Thanos, and then that doesn't really pan out properly. It doesn't really seem to do much damage to him. But that, to me is very comparable to like what they have Finn and Rose doing in The Last Jedi. It's like we kind of need something for these characters to do to keep them busy, Yeah. We kind of need a third narrative strand, and it doesn't. Anyway. Basically, the two primary story. The two primary climactic scenarios are one group of Avengers and the Wakandan army trying to defend Wakanda from an invading alien army, and the other group of Avengers on Titan trying to kill Thanos.
Yeah, pretty much. Obviously you saw Black Panther when it came out in February, right? That's the most recently you've seen any MCU film. How excited were you for this?
Not at all.
Not at all?
No.
Okay, so...
I was kind of like curious to see what they would do with it.
Right.
I was particularly curious because when this Phase 3 slate was originally announced, this was announced as Avengers Infinity War Part 1. And the fourth Avengers film next year was announced as Avengers Infinity War Part 2.
Right.
And then they backpedaled on that and said, no, this one is just Avengers Infinity War. And the next one they're currently referring to as Untitled Avengers film.
Yeah.
And they're insisting, and have been insisting for a long time, that no, they're two completely different stories. We decided that they're two separate stories. And I never believed that.
No.
And sure enough, it was just a lie. Because the way this just ends in the middle of the story. It's just a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Like an Empire Strikes Back style.
It is.
Like,
it's
come
very
back
much
next year for the rest of the story.
It's a funny one because each sort of phase ends or nearly ends with, the marketing phases. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, of which this is the culmination. They end or nearly end with an Avengers film. So phase 2 ends with Ant-Man, but I think that's so that they can begin phase 3 with Civil War, I guess. So they have like these films in which the superheroes are sort of, they come together for an ensemble picture, which then teases directly towards what is now Infinity War. But then in between them, you've got like these sort of, origin stories or introductory stories or sort of sequels. So you've got like Ant-Man, for instance. Then you've got like, Captain America 2 or Captain America 3, you've got Thor 2, Thor 3, and like they have to obviously exist as standalone films, otherwise, obviously the demands for continuity here are high.
Very, yeah.
But they also then have to satisfy their own sort of logic, the films as well, as standalone entities. And some films I think do that more than others. Like Ant-Man I think stands alone very well because the way he's introduced to this universe, it doesn't really have to connect as he exists in that film.
Yeah, it's the thing Ant-Man is most heavily tied into is S.H.I.E.L.D. and Captain America and Captain America's dad. Oh wait, is that right? No, it's Tony Stark's father who is... Yeah. Whatever his name is, I can't remember. But yeah, and actually in that movie, that's the weakest aspect of it, is the whole backstory with Michael Douglas's character and his history with S.H.I.E.L.D. and what happened to his wife and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. So my point was going to be that all of these films, to certain degrees, have lots and lots of plot to sort of get across, right? Because of the way they interconnect and relate to one another. And so I was excited for this one. Obviously, I've seen them in such a condensed fashion that the narrative mechanisms of Captain America: Civil War, which is the most, I think, directly related to this film, I suppose, in terms of establishing the separation of the Avengers and where they're at the beginning of this film, but also Thor Ragnarok as well. I kind of guess hints at, for just geographically or physically, that what's going to happen at the beginning of this film. They can do away with all of that plot, right? And all of that interconnection and the need to, connect things up. So I was excited for that, having seen them in such a condensed fashion, so close together enough that the narrative sort of momentum hadn't been lost, right? So it wasn't like 3 or 4 years ago when I saw the one that's most directly related to this that I need to see. Because a lot of them you could see without, and it wouldn't really have any bearing of your understanding on this one. But some of them, are more relevant.
Yeah, I mean, some of them, like what you're saying, some of them have this like for example, the end of Thor Ragnarok, where we see the Asgardian ship coming face to face with Thanos' ship. I presume that's what that was, right?
Yeah, it's actually the post-credits scene, but yeah, you're right.
Oh, is it? Okay, yeah. So you have those kinds of things, and then obviously Captain America: Civil War, which leaves a lot hanging about like what is going to happen with Captain America and all that kind of thing. But you also, I was going to ask you that actually, if you hadn't, for example, watched Doctor Strange, the sequence in New York in the Sanctum Sanctorum, wouldn't really make sense. You wouldn't know who he was. So
No.
this, would you say that of all of the Marvel movies, this one is the one that is the most kind of geared toward delivering for hardcore fans?
Infinity War, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, just to come back a bit, it does help. It did help their cause, I suppose, making an Origins film on Doctor Strange. I didn't know who Doctor Strange was. I didn't even know he was a character, right? For me, it's just like, he looks like he belongs in a TV show, or Doctor Strange feels like a TV pilot, and yet...
Are you saying that because of the similarity with Doctor Who?
I don't know. Maybe, I don't know, but maybe it's Benedict Cumberbatch as well. The fact that he's played by him, whose face I associate with kind of prestige fantasy sci-fi television. His attempt at a New York accent notwithstanding, but it helps. It's convenient for them that Doctor Strange happens to be the most sort of directly related after Civil War to this one, because otherwise, if I was in the mood if I had been in the mood, to sort of skip over any, Doctor Strange would have been one of my first choices, and yet, it's kind of integral to the whole thing. This one, this one's emotional resonance is heavily dependent upon necessarily a previous familiarity with the other films.
Right. So, I mean, the two films that you mentioned here, Thor Ragnarok and Civil War, as being the two most directly connected, I would actually say, on a plot level, sure, but on the level of emotional substance.
Yeah.
The primary protagonist of this film is Gamora.
Yeah. Right.
And the antagonist is Thanos, and their relationship. So I would say that the three core relationship, the core relationship in this film is Gamora Thanos, right? And then you've got Gamora Star-Lord. And then as a third kind of emotional center, you've got Vision Scarlet Witch.
Yes.
But beyond that, there isn't much in the way of drama in the movie, right?
Yeah. Did you mention Doctor Strange there as well? Because he's integral to the plot.
He's integral to the plot, but there's no emotional content there at all.
I get you, right? Yeah.
There's the three core relationships in the movie are Gamora Thanos, Gamora Star-Lord, and Vision Scarlet Witch.
Yes.
Everybody else serves a plot function to greater or lesser degrees, but that's the dramatic heart of the movie. Yeah. Insofar as it goes.
Yes.
And I would say if you had to pick a primary protagonist, it would have to be Gamora, which makes particularly the first Guardians of the Galaxy film very central to that, because that's the only other MCU film that Thanos plays a significant role in.
I agree.
Aside from appearing in post-credit scenes and stuff.
And yet, two of those relationships that you've mentioned have never really had any screen time before this film. So like Vision and Wanda, it's like it's hinted at strongly, I guess, that they have some kind of connection that's going to be romantic.
There's a bit in Civil War, isn't there? Where
I mean, like they're together and alone for a lot of Civil War, but he
has her under house arrest or something.
Yeah, that's right. But it's not like concretized as anything like quantifiably romantic, I wouldn't say. And then
I honestly had, when I was watching this, I had honestly forgotten what Vision was. Even I had forgotten whether he was human or something until Banner explains. You're an artificial intelligence with parts of me and parts of Stark and parts of Jarvis.
All of a sudden in this film, it's just Paul Bettany.
Like, who was the voice of Jarvis in like Iron Man 1 and 2, and then they just decided to cast him.
But it's anyway. Like, where's his red skin gone? That skin tight red suit he wears.
But so you've got those three things, and then on top of that, you have a kind of assorted story fragments that are hanging from previous films. So, for example, we're going to talk probably a little bit more about the other movies later. Maybe we can rank them at the end. But the one of last year's ones, Spider-Man: Homecoming. The thing that bothered me the most about that movie was that I just thought that the plot was just absolute nonsense. It was like you take the heart and soul of the Spider-Man story, you remove it, the whole Uncle Ben thing and everything like that, and instead you replace it with a story about Spider-Man wants to be an Avenger, and Tony Stark says, no, you're not ready to be an Avenger, and Spider-Man tries to prove to Tony Stark that he is ready, and then at the end Tony Stark offers him a position on the Avengers and Spider-Man turns it down. That's the whole story, and I don't care about any of that. It's terrible.
No.
And then
I agree.
And then in this one, he just makes him an Avenger at the very beginning. So it just like negates the entire like plot of Spider-Man. Anyway. So anyway, there was that resolution to Spider-Man: Homecoming, the struggle in Spider-Man: Homecoming.
You've also got,
and then you've also got
Banner's belated return to Earth.
Sure, you've got that little story thread, and you've also got. You've also got a little bit of a continuation of the Black Panther stuff, where they've opened Wakanda and all that kind of stuff. And Bucky's reunite, Bucky and Captain America. And little drips and drops of stuff from previous films that isn't really relevant to the goings-on in this one.
And, I mean, the post-credit scenes across the 19 films have veered between being extremely integral to our understanding of this film. So, like, for instance, how Captain America knows, like, of Wakanda, and how Bucky's there, to the throwaway and the funny and the comic. And it's like, well, if they're integral, shouldn't they be in the film? But obviously, the post-credit scenes have become the film now, haven't they? So, do you like
post-credit scenes?
Sorry?
Do you like post-credit scenes?
Yeah.
I hate them.
Really?
I just want to get up and leave. Particularly when they turn out to be terrible.
Well, that's the joy of watching them in across 3 days. That you can just skip the 10-minute to 15-minute.
How much did you pay for the MCU films that you watched over the past 3 days?
Nothing.
It's a good thing you paid to see Avengers, then.
Yeah. So I'm getting a sense that the film doesn't work at all for you.
It has moments. It has a few funny moments. Although the humor, like, it's a very generic, like, sitcom style humor, like a kind of a sitcom sarcasm.
Yeah.
That even, like, sometimes the jokes are written in such a way that it's like they don't know where the punchlines are.
Yeah.
Like there's a really funny joke where Thor is on wherever he is, trying to get the new hammer, and he's talking to this giant character played by Peter Dinklage. Yeah. And I can't remember the specifics. Whatever, he needs to somehow like hold this mechanism together while the full power of a star shoots through the mechanism. Yeah. And Dinklage's character says, you're going to take the full power of a star, you'll die, or no, it will kill you. And Thor says, only if I die. And I thought that was really funny and really character based. It was a little bit like the I'm Mary Poppins y'all joke at the end of Guardians 2. Yeah. Whereas like that's so true to the character, and it entails a certain degree of characterization in itself. And then they have Dinklage go, "That's what kill you means." I was like, that's shit. That's just like over-explaining the jokes, and you know, there's a lot of that kind of like somebody like or the scene that's in I think it's in one of the trailers where Peter Quill is trying to deepen his voice to make himself seem manlier in front of Thor, and the other characters point out that he's doing it, and then he denies that he's doing it, and then they point out that he's still doing it and that he's doing it again. I just think that's terrible, like really shit comedy writing. Anyway, but it does have it has some funny moments.
There is a tendency to over-explain or even explain the jokes that stand alone as themselves, but obviously that's reflective of the broader fan base that not even fan base, but just the age group that they're trying to accommodate here.
Sure.
Which I think compromises any genuine sort of identity, right? Because they're trying to please as many people as possible. They're trying to cater towards as many different demographics as possible, I think.
Yeah.
But I was a lot more excited for this than you were going into it. Because it felt like going to see it yesterday morning would retroactively validate the process of watching all of these films in such a short amount of time. And there was, I was kind of like, I'd seen the trailers. I thought the trailer was extremely good. I know we've just listened to a shorter version of it, but the official one in cinemas with Brolin's voice, which what we've just heard is, what's he say again? Dread it, run from it, destiny still arrives. I think, his voice performance from the trailer was extremely, something to induce excitement. And for the most part, you know what? For the most part, I thought they kind of pulled off this epic task of keeping one interested over the course of 149 minutes with so much going on. So your thing about Thor and Rocket feeling like a bit of like an add-on, like giving them something to do in the film, it didn't really feel like a weak point to me, probably because I enjoyed the interactions between Rocket and Thor. And Groot, I suppose. Although this is of Groot's 3 incarnations now, in Guardians 1 where he's like an adult, in Guardians 2 where he's a baby, and this one where he's like a whiny teenager. This is my least favourite Groot, probably.
Yeah, it's hard. He gets so little to do in this, like so many other characters, that it's hard to really. Because I was thinking about that, like when it ultimately comes time to say, for example, like let's say, for example, like ranking the Spider-Man films.
Yeah.
When it comes to these like crossover movies, you would have the 3 Sam Raimi films, and you would have the 2 Mark Webb films, and you'd have Spider-Man: Homecoming. But would you include Civil War and Infinity War in a list of Spider-Man? I don't know. It's funny like that, but yeah. No, I actually. Sorry. No, I Go ahead.
I was just going to say as well, like, Spider-Man, ironically, is at his funniest in Civil War.
I thought he was funnier in this.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, he's certainly funnier in the small doses that we get him in Civil War and Infinity War than he is. He's a little bit grating, I think, in Homecoming. It's a little bit much. I was going to say, I agree with you that overall this is remarkably well handled. It's well, like with so many moving parts, it's quite impressive how well paced and streamlined it is. It's a pity that it's in the service of absolutely nothing.
Well, for you, because for me, okay, so let's get down to it, right? So, there's a tension across all of these films, I think, between the joy and experience of merely spending time with a character, right, over the course of a single film, and especially, I think, over the course of multiple films, and B, the need for a satisfyingly written script that satisfies certain aesthetic demands, which I guess, and we'll get to ranking them, but personally for me, the one end of the scale, you've got something like Spider-Man: Homecoming or The Incredible Hulk, made all those years ago, and then at the top, something else. But I don't want to reveal what I think is at the top.
Can I throw in a third consideration though, and that is like aesthetics and style also.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I said aesthetics as a sort of
right, but that's kind of more like narrative drama kind of end of the thing. But there's also this question of, as you know, a lot of people have spoken about like Marvel's color grading practices and their that kind of, which is something that really bothered me in this film actually, is how horribly like there was a shot, I think it was when they were on Titan, there was a sequence with, I think it might even be in the trailer, where like Doctor Strange and Spider-Man and Peter Quill are in the same frame, and like obviously Strange has a red cape and Spider-Man is red and blue, and Peter Quill has a red leather jacket, and in the background there's all this like wreckage, this rusted metal, and I was looking at the image, and it's like the entire image is shades of like rust and slate. And, like there's no color.
50 Shades of Rust.
Yeah. It's so dreary looking, the whole thing. And I think that's true probably to varying degrees with the Marvel movies, but I think the three films that the Russo brothers have directed are probably the worst offenders in that regard. I
think so. No, I totally agree with that, and which is why I was a little anxious that this film wouldn't be a sort of spatially fluid. But I mean, all of that's there. I think like the the spatial dynamics of the action sequences. But I totally agree with the color. I was at the other end of the scale, like interior shots on spaceships. So like maybe it was the cinema in which I saw it, but like the like the tiny little spotlights that remain on in a cinema, like the tiny white ones. They just seemed maybe a tiny little bit too bright, because I was thinking surely this film isn't meant to be this dark, because like I was struggling to even like see certain details in some of the scenes and the interiors on spaceships, just like really, really dark. And that even included like the Guardians of the Galaxy segments, because I think those two films, the standalone films, have
particularly the second one,
managed to sort of get beyond that limited sort of color palette.
I would say the second Guardians of the Galaxy is the best looking film in the whole thing, in the whole series.
Yeah, I would agree. But then, like, so you've got, like, these films all tend to have the same weaknesses for me, right? Their duration, their flab, their sense of scale that they impose upon themselves, the same sense of mayhem when shit hits the fan in the final 40 minutes, and these same sorts of emotional beats. So this one, I suppose...
On top of that, I would throw in the fixation on the doodads and the MacGuffins that everyone is chasing, and the way that everything connects together, and the seeming, and I mean judging by the box office receipts and everything, the justified presumption that the audience is really, really interested in the sort of universe around the film that you're watching. And the way in which so many of the films serve that purpose, like the way that, say, for example, Captain America Civil War deals with like the real world ramifications of what happened in Age of Ultron and Avengers, and like and like Black Panther was similar, like the politics of this like fictional universe, and like that's the reason that I prefer the films like Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and Ant-Man and things like that are focused on characters, just these characters' stories. Sorry, go ahead.
So what about stuff like in Civil War, when they're getting torn apart because they disagree, the Avengers, I mean, because they disagree with one another regarding signing the UN Accords? Do you like just don't respond to that kind of stuff?
No, I don't like it at all. I don't like that. I don't like the to me, I can't remember, was it when we talked about Justice League? I was talking about this, that I don't want. It's purely just a matter of taste, but like I don't want, like when it comes to superhero movies, I do not want social commentary. I don't want them to be posing questions like, what if Superman really existed? How would real world political institutions really respond to him? That is just not interesting at all. It's like the absolute opposite end of the spectrum from what potentially attracts me to. I'm not a big superhero fan, but like I have nothing against superhero material.
Sure.
And I like action films. I would prefer that they were just more sort of pulpy and, you know.
Yeah, you would have responded to MCU, I think, if it had emerged in the mid-90s, like round about Batman Forever.
I actually
time.
just recently rewatched The Rocketeer. I was like,
oh really?
I wish superhero movies were like this.
Yeah. See, so this is what I don't get with my own sort of response to these films. Civil War, I quite like that what if scenario, like, and the ethics and responsibilities that are kind of, you know, superficially explored. Ultimately, I think it's counterintuitive for them because they become so sort of fixated upon having to say something because they're set in a world in which, you know, people expect them to say something, and they inevitably become kind of incoherent. I think, if we're to read these films and as like sort of politically or in political terms, they become kind of incoherent. I think because there's no real like coherent position to sort of express or whatever. But I did like it, despite completely agreeing with you on this usually and stuff with regard to like DC, even the Nolan Batman films. But anyway, that's another question. I don't want to get into that. But like,
the Nolan Batman films go further with that though. They try to turn it into kind of like allegory, which is even worse. And like the Zack Snyder films take it to a level even beyond that. But even just what Marvel is doing, where it's not allegory, it's just like, let's take this really seriously and let's strip the fantasy element out of it as much as possible.
So you've got like James Rhodes, aka War Machine here, like on the phone to like the vice president. The secretary of what? Sorry, I'm played by Don Cheadle. You know, like talking with, is it the Secretary of State or the Defense Secretary?
Played by who plays him? William Hurt, isn't it?
William Hurt, yeah. You know, is that the kind of thing that you mean?
Yeah, the whole thing with General Ross, who's probably been very on edge ever since his daughter disappeared from the MCU after the Incredible Hulk.
No wonder he's so cranky.
Yeah.
But so anyway, like, so that's you know, they all kind of have the same weaknesses.
Yeah. Although this film, I preferred this film to Civil War because it's not like that. Like this is.
So that's what I was going to say. This one feels like it sort of resists that.
Right. It's more like high fantasy. It's like it's a space opera primarily.
And if anything, if they'd limited it to the one film, I know they haven't now. So let's say Avengers 4. They have an opportunity to just completely free themselves after this, get it all out their system, and get into, like, you know, goofy standalone films. They don't, you know, like, they can still come together and save the world, but it doesn't have to be like an institutionally relatable world, right?
Sure. I don't think that's in the cards, though.
I don't think it's going to be in the cards either. No, I have very prospects for this.
That's another thing we talked about on the Justice League episode was when you take all of these characters and you throw them into the same film, you end up with this kind of thematic soup, you know, where the film is not really... Like what I said on that episode was that I have no interest in these films seriously in the way in which they ask to be taken seriously. And that's what I mean when I talk about Civil War. I have no interest in taking these films seriously, like as political thrillers or something like that. Yeah. But there are other ways to approach it. You know, there's a way to take these things seriously, like as kind of as, you know, forms of mythology. You know,
sure,
that's fine. But like, you know, if you look at a movie, you take like a character like the Incredible Hulk, like the themes that emerge from that character's story are like Jekyll and Hyde themes and things like that. Like themes similar to themes you would find in like a werewolf story or something like that, right? And that appeals to me. But you throw that character into like some sort of weird kind of like tech fetish kind of story like Iron Man, and they don't go together. They don't really, those themes don't kind of mesh into anything coherent or interesting. And then you throw in Doctor Strange, which is all about like, you know, parallel dimensions and like okay, I get how it's kind of cool on a superficial level, but it's extreme. Like, and the more people that you throw in, the more extremely shallow it becomes.
Yeah,
because none of it meshes or goes together or means anything together, except for everybody's trying to find these doodads in different parts of the universe, right?
Yeah,
which is a plot structure and a mechanism that everything from Sauron trying to get the rings of power in Lord of the Rings to Dr. Robotnik trying to get the Chaos Emeralds in Sonic the Hedgehog.
Absolutely.
But it's not interesting in and of itself. Like, what's interesting in Lord of the Rings is the journey of the hobbits, right? So it's that. It's not like we're not like interested in Sauron, like his journey to get the rings. Like, that's not interesting. And you know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you think that a large part of this sort of ongoing or increasing ennui, let's say, that's set in for you, is the fact that these films have emerged within a culture that is obsessed with origin stories as well? So you just can't start this universe and have these people existing, these superheroes existing in themselves. You've got to explain how they're formed, right? Because that's the cool thing. So, like, Captain America, like, there's a real world origin there, like, historical setting. Doesn't have to be, but if they're going to be faithful to the comics, then he's a World War vet. Right. Iron Man, like tech fetishist, as you said, like a tech guy. Whereas something like the Hulk, which ironically is one of the weakest single films in the franchise, that doesn't have to be sort of linked or rooted to a real world sort of institutionally, or historically. It can just be like in America, or a world. It doesn't have to be like specific.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Why would you say that Iron Man does, though?
Oh, well,
because Iron Man originally was Iron Man originally was like set during the Vietnam War, and it was kind of an anti-communist figure.
Yeah.
And now, obviously, with the 2008 one, it was the Iraq War.
Yeah. And like, they've got his dad, like, hosting expos and stuff like that, and like that kind of thing. I agree. I don't necessarily
have any problem with origin stories. I do think that the assumption that they're always necessary is a bit ridiculous. But yeah, I don't know, because so for me, my question to myself is like, what's interesting in this film? Yes, it has beats that are kind of like amusing, and that's about as positive as I can go.
But what if the beats, amusing or otherwise, are in the context of the in-film universe sort of emotionally resonant?
What if they are, or which of them are?
Yeah, what if they are?
Well, if they were, then sure, but are they?
But they're not. Well, I like this film.
Okay.
I liked it a lot, actually. So I'm inclined more towards the collaborative set pieces and the ensemble films, I think, and more than I am the single films. Right. So before this, I did respond well to Civil War, the first Avengers film I really like. Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2, I think are up there as like some of the strongest films in the franchise. And so the idea of getting these characters together, I like, because I've spent time with them. It's often the chemistries during the downtimes as well, like say an Age of Ultron, sorry. Like, it's not the action scenes in that film that are like I'm there for. It's like when they go off to the safe house and they're all just like chilling out and talking, and you've got Bruce Banner and Bruce and Natasha, sorry, like getting along, and what's going to happen then, etc., which obviously feeds back into the serial nature of these films as well, as like kind of massive budgeted soap operas. And you've got humor and character based interrelations in this one as well. So I quite like that. But alongside that, which I found like they really nailed, was the sense of peril and the idea that the action in this one seems to be a thing of consequence. Whereas, like, because of the nature... Okay, bear with me though, right? Because there's obviously an inherent contradiction here. Because, like, if this was let's just imagine that this is the final Marvel film, right?
Yeah. Okay.
If it is, it's completely amazing, no? Like,
If this was the end, well, I don't know. In all honesty, the film was so long that I had to duck out to the bathroom right before the last scene.
Oh, what?
But I saw everybody dying. I just missed the Thanos sitting and meditating or whatever it was.
Okay.
But yeah.
Oh well, yeah. You only missed the meditating.
Right. No, I saw everybody turning to dust, and I caught the post-credit scene with Nick Fury and.
Right. And, so the final shot of the film is Thanos just sitting there, and he smiles very contentedly, just by himself, just like, I've done it, I did it.
Great. So.
Okay, so you can. Sorry, continue.
The end of the film.
Yeah.
Okay, well, first of all, in the trailer, when Gamora says if he collects all of the Infinity Stones, he can wipe out half the life in the universe with a snap of his fingers.
Yeah.
I didn't think that was literally the plot. I thought she was just suggesting that he would be the most powerful being in the universe, and like you said in your introduction, that he could control and destroy the universe at will. Yeah. But no, he literally will wipe out literally half of the people in the universe, literally with a snap of his fingers. And we're never told why it's half. Like, he's presented as this kind of weird, like, cosmic Malthusian, like, environmentalist or something like that.
Yeah.
Like
he's a sensible eco warrior.
Yeah, like kind of deep ecology kind of like catastrophism that like wants to kind of hasten a collapse of civilization to restore some sort of like natural harmony. But we're never told why it's exactly half either. Like, is the universe exactly 100% overpopulated? It just seems crazy.
Balance, isn't it? It's balance.
I have it on good authority that the motivation for the character in the comics is completely different, and it's actually he's fascinated by nihilism and death.
Like, he's in love with death
herself,
in love with
Mistress
Lady
Death, the personification of death, and he's doing what he's doing to try to impress her. That's so much better than the motivation in the film.
No, I agree,
the motivation in the film is just this empty meaning, like first of all, incomprehensible. Like, we're not given any sort of context to make sense of his motivations. Why is he driven to do this? It doesn't make any sense. But it's also completely devoid of any sort of emotional substance, you know. Whereas at least if he was driven by this kind of like perverse love, like, his name is Thanos, which is derived from Thanatos, which means the death drive, you know. Yeah. So it's like that should be kind of who he is, and that's much more interesting and much scarier.
So you don't agree that this film has a sense of peril that's well established? Because in the first scene, so he kills Loki, as we said.
Yeah. At this point, I don't really believe that anyone who dies in this franchise is actually dead, though. We got Red Skull back in this one. Loki. Thor mentions that Loki died before in Thor 2, I think.
It's true. It's true.
Clark Gregg died in the first Avengers and came back in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and so on. But yeah. And
so
Bucky died in the first. Bucky died in the first Captain America, and then he came back. So anyway.
Yeah. No. But.
And they're about to double down on it in the next Avengers film when everybody that they
that's
killed
the thing.
is going to come back.
So that's the
why
thing.
Why kill Spider-Man and Doctor Strange and all the Guardians when we already know that there's a Spider-Man movie coming out next year and there's a Doctor Strange and a Guardians 3 coming out the year after that? It doesn't make any sense.
They've shot themselves in the foot.
But like whatever about, like, okay, I don't understand it, like, from a storytelling perspective. I don't get why. Like, let me ask you this: when the writers were writing this, do you think that they wanted us to feel those deaths as significant, or do they assume that we already know that they're going to be retconned in the next Avengers movie because they've already announced Spider-Man 2 for next year? Like, of course Spider-Man isn't there. You know, it carries no weight at all.
But like, I know it's impossible to, but if you take this film like as a standalone entity, it's pretty. I was like, whoa, they're all dying, and the way in which they like vanish as well into that dust thing, I found like really like visually potent. Just like being reduced, like not dying, but just really being reduced to nothing. Like
I thought it looked too kind of computer generated. You know, there's a way to do that. There's a way to do that in a more sort of like tactile, substantive kind of way.
See,
that
like,
could have been kind of cool.
Because the stakes are continually being risen, right? Because, as we said, the sense of mayhem is always identical in these films, right? It has to bottom out at some point. It has to bottom out. Like, you can't keep raising the stakes. And like introducing all these superpowers. So you get Doctor Strange, and then you get like Scarlet Witch, whose energy, use of energy is like, which completely renders all the bish bash bosh stuff of like Iron Man and Captain America.
And the Wakandan army with their spears.
Yeah, it's just like who's it that says when Scarlet Witch who belatedly kind of enters the battle at the end?
Oh I forgot her name. One of the warrior, the leader of the army in Wakanda, whatever her name is.
And she says, "Why hasn't she?"
Yeah, why was she up there all this time?
Stuff.
Yeah,
and it's kind of a funny in joke because we're all sitting there thinking, "But why wasn't she?" I mean,
sorry, I forgot. I forgot the other story thread that is not so much continued but introduced, and I presume it'll play a major factor in the next Avengers film. Is Banner's inability to become the Hulk?
Yeah,
so that's kind of a new little bit.
Because in the trailer, the shot, the final shot of the official trailer, they're all running in Wakanda,
and the Hulk is there.
Is in there with them.
Yeah, that's true.
But in this, he's having to wear Stark's big, massive Hulk-size iron suit.
His Hulkbuster,
yeah.
That's good. I forgot about that. That's true. Yeah.
Because
they didn't just lie. They didn't just lie about it not being part one. There are lies woven through the entire marketing campaign.
A shot, right? Actually, the very final shot of the official trailer, when Thor says, "Who the hell are you guys?" and it's the Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's the shot that they cut to. Rocket's in the shot, but the shot in the film, Rocket's already on board with Thor in the pod that they're going to travel away from. So they've actually superimposed Rocket into that shot.
Right. That's less of a lie, though.
It's less of a lie.
The other one is a promise of a lot of Hulk action in the movie.
It's
when
true.
There's 20 seconds at the beginning.
Because Hulk presumably could play a significant part in overcoming Thanos.
Sure.
Because he's Hulk, he's indestructible.
But do you see what I mean though? That like when presuming that happens in Avengers 4, then Hulk, the entire character of Hulk and everything that goes into that character is reduced to Hulk is really strong. He'll help in this fight. Whereas the story of Hulk is like the story of Banner's struggle with this this curse. It's very much a werewolf story, and like his struggle and his journey to try to cure himself of this curse and try to keep it in check, and the guilt that he feels for. Like, I like that character. I like the themes. I like the ideas in that story. Too. But once you throw him into this soup, he's just reduced to nothing. He's reduced to this everyone is reduced to this one-dimensional embodiment of a particular superpower, and that's it. So,
which ironically is perhaps why, because I don't disagree, it's perhaps why I've found myself watching them all kind of pleased when certain characters show up. So for instance, but like the non-superhero characters, so like Bart Clinton, Jeremy Renner, I always like it when he's in the films who isn't in this one.
I wonder why Liv Tyler never showed up again. Because there's a moment in this. There's a moment in this one. There's a moment in this one where Hulk comes back and he hasn't been on Earth since the end of Avengers. So it's been 3 years since Avengers: Age of Ultron, and he has this moment with Black Widow because they had sort of a thing before or whatever.
Yeah,
where she was the only one who could kind of calm him down or whatever. And and there's that, but that's not really. I mean, it's completely insubstantial in this movie, and I don't know whether it will continue or develop in some way in the next one. But it just reminded me of Betty Ross from that other one. I don't know why. I don't think Liv Tyler's not people aren't banging down her door with
He's moved on. Come on, people are allowed to move on.
I do, but I think isn't it interesting though that this kind of that what we're talking about, this this crossover soup is kind of seen as like the highest aspiration of these films, and that's inherited from the comic books, where not to attribute entirely cynical motivations to it, but I do believe that a major motivating factor for the rise of crossovers in comic books, and not so much crossovers but shared universes, was simply like, okay, the Spider-Man comic is selling really well, but Daredevil isn't selling as well. What if Spider-Man showed up in Daredevil, and then Daredevil showed up in Spider-Man, and we could kind of like this very kind of nimble brand reinforcement, where in order to follow the full Spider-Man story, you have to buy an issue of Daredevil, and hopefully in buying that issue of Daredevil, you'll get hooked on Daredevil, and then Daredevil's going to show up in Spider-Man, and then we'll kind of build it out from there, irrespective of all the obvious like logical questions that it raises in terms of, you know, all these superheroes living in New York. Why is there ever a case of like Spider-Man fighting a villain on his own when the Fantastic Four live there as well? And also then the question of like the X-Men, which I always really didn't like the idea that the X-Men are in the same universe, where I think it's like 8% or 12% or something of the human population are superheroes. It's like, why is Spider-Man special? Why are the Fantastic Four special if everybody, one in 12 people has, you know, comparable superpowers? But but it is interesting that that's become something that is aspired to, whereas historically in cinema, it was always the opposite. It was like, that was what you did when you were out of ideas. You know, that was like, so like when James Cameron and Ridley Scott were developing Alien 5, they were going to produce it together, and Ridley Scott was going to direct it, and obviously he ultimately, it's more or less the project that ultimately evolved into Prometheus, even though it was a completely different story eventually. This was before Alien vs. Predator came out, and it was Alien vs. Predator, it was Fox's decision to pursue that project that ultimately ended James Cameron's involvement in it, because he said, to me, that was like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. It just cheapened the brand. It's like you're going to take Predator and you're going to take Alien and you're going to throw them together. And what's it about? It's like we said on the Justice League episode, where this material, it emerges from like a kind of schoolyard question of like, who'd win in a fight between Batman and Superman? You know, it's like, it's that, like intellectually, it's like that level. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's what it is. Yeah. And Alien versus Predator, same thing. And it's always been regarded as the bottom of the barrel, like a last-ditch effort to try to do something, some sort of novelty, you know, throw Dracula and Wolfman together in the same movie. But for some reason, the exact opposite is the case now, and it's the highest aspiration of the genre, is to throw everything together into the same soup.
It reminded me a little bit, this one, of season finale and final season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer as well. So the sense of peril, which I am going to stick with my argument. You haven't convinced me otherwise. I do think this film does have a strong sense of peril. I think Thanos is a very well voiced villain, let's say, in Brolin. He has a gravitas. You get the sense that it's all going to shit for everyone. And a large part of this is due to, you know, stuff like actors and performances, which can't be underestimated in terms of the power and import here and the currency.
The few people who are given anything to do with their talent.
Sure. Like, so having started the franchise with Robert Downey Jr., and I know from off-the-record conversations with you that his novelty sort of wore thin quickly for you across the single films and the ensembles. For me, it didn't. I like his performance. I like him as a character. To see him, so the final sort of scene in which he almost dies but doesn't because he's saved by Doctor Strange, but in which, you know, he's extremely vulnerable all of a sudden in a way that we haven't seen him before. I like that new context, and I like that kind of stuff, because I do think it assists the general feeling that everything's sort of falling apart here and there isn't anything that they can do. But then, of course, we've had Doctor Strange like doing that whole thing where he's like looking into the future, looking into the future, and he says there's only one scenario of however many million he's looked at in which we win here. So presumably everything that happens after the film, he knows that he needs to do that, you know, because that's the only way that they're going to win. So that's the reason that he surrendered.
Is it the time stone that he has?
Yeah,
he surrendered.
The time stone,
the reason that he surrendered the time stone, even though he swore before that he would let Tony and Peter die before surrendering it. It's because presumably in his vision
Yeah.
of the only possible victorious scenario, Tony plays an integral role in that. So he has to live.
Which brings us back to this raising stakes. So, like, we're way beyond now the human physicality of Captain America, right? And we're into stuff like universe time warping, which completely renders everything a little bit redundant.
Do you think that's why they've seemingly retired Hawkeye and his bow and arrow?
Possibly. I mean, like, I was thinking, you know, Ant-Man could very easily steal one of these stones, if not more than one, in one little go. You know, he just crawls down Thanos' arm,
Ant-Man is
and
the best.
makes himself big and Thanos really small. How can that not happen? Honestly,
Yeah. Presumably, the new Ant-Man movie is a prequel that will explain why Ant-Man wasn't present for this. But I was expecting Ant-Man to be in it. You know, and I was disappointed because he's probably my favorite character. I really like Ant-Man. Do you have anything else to say about this, or do you want to move on to just ranking the MCU?
Well, I liked Dave Bautista in it as well. I like him as a whole and across the Guardians of the Galaxy. He's extremely funny here. And I like the badass moments here, right? So my evaluation, and we'll come to the evaluation of the films when we rank them. My evaluation of them against one another comes down to superficial stuff like the strength of the villain or the hero or lead performance or how memorable a single film performance is or a character or a set piece. And so I like the badass moments here, like where Captain America returns and it's like way from the shadows in Edinburgh Waverley train station, and then, which by the way is curiously de-peopled Edinburgh Waverley, but then like a train just rushes through the train station like at midnight. What? Thought I was watching Trainspotting 2 again. And the moment where Thor returns and he's just got his new axe, not a hammer, he's got an axe, and it's like, way, here he comes, he's gonna fucking beat everyone up. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, I mean, like I think that's true. That what you're saying about, like, you know, the idea of, I mean, that was even true in the Avengers. I think when there's that sort of shot of all the Avengers together in New York, and they're kind of like they're all standing in a circle facing outward, and the camera is you know, circling around them. Black Widow's there, and she has this tiny little pistol.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Why are you there? But it is, I mean, that is true. I think also in the comic books, it just has always been true of like the relative power of these various different characters and how they have to power them up or power them down to suit the story purposes and like that. Whatever, you know, as long as their capacities are clear for the current context, I don't have a problem with that. You know, you have to allow some leeway for new writers to come and reinterpret the characters and give them new abilities and whatever, you know.
Because obviously the time stone, when it's reacquired, is going to, you know, balance the banks, isn't it? It's going to make these characters, going to bring these characters back to life so they can make more movies with them. So
yeah, it
for
has to
one
happen
moment,
before
I was like,
Spider-Man 2 comes out, like 3 months after Avengers 4.
Yeah. And what else I was going to say is, again, like the escalation of stakes and powers. We get the post-credits scene here. So obviously things have to get worse before they get better in this world, which I think tonally the film works. And then you get the post-credits scene in which Nick Fury is killed also. But before he disappears into dust, he sends a page or a message on some sort of device
to Captain Marvel.
To, we presume, is Captain Marvel, which is going to be explained in the prequel that's coming up, the new Captain Marvel film, which I think is set in the 90s.
Yeah.
Why she hasn't been communicated to before this point.
Yeah. There has to be some sort of explanation for that.
Yeah, there has to be an explanation. That's what I mean. Like,
so the next two, so Ant-Man,
way out of things.
So Ant-Man and Captain Marvel are the only two films that we're getting between Avengers Infinity War Part 1 and Avengers Infinity War Part 2.
Yeah.
It's now obvious that is what they are. Despite insistence to the contrary. So
momentum-sucking prequels.
I don't know. I mean, who knows? I would imagine particularly Captain Marvel will play into whatever happens in Avengers 4 in a kind of retroactive way.
I
don't know. I hope Ant-Man is in Avengers 4.
Who's your favorite Marvel? Who's your favorite Avenger?
Ant-Man.
Ant-Man.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely Ant-Man.
I think Thor, or at least Thor is how Hemsworth plays him. I think Hemsworth's one of the great revelations of this series for me, because having only been exposed to him through Black Hat and then the Ghostbusters remake, obviously he's very funny in Black Hat. Sorry?
Cabin in the Woods.
Oh yeah, Cabin in the Woods. No, sorry, not Black Hat. He's very funny in the Ghostbusters remake. But this the MCU just kind of retroactively reveals Michael Mann's utter humorlessness and self-seriousness, because he just didn't even think about tapping Hemsworth's comic talents in Black Hat, which is a very self-serious film. But I have nothing more to say about this film. I think you're going to be surprised by where I rank it in the overall series, though.
Okay. Do you want to go first, or should I?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you like my 19 to 11.
All right.
So the bottom 4 I would rate 5 out of 10, right? And then for the rest of these are going to be 6 out of 10s.
What would that be in stars?
But so the first 4 here don't get any stars, I don't think.
Okay.
And then the next 6. No, and then the next 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the next 4 will be 6 out of 10. So the worst one for me is Thor: The Dark World.
Okay.
Then it's The Incredible Hulk, second worst. Then probably Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Okay.
It's just too long. Like it's too
so long, isn't
minutes.
it? And it has no story. Like, I don't care if Spider-Man becomes an Avenger. Why have you taken? I understand that they've done 2 origin stories, but it's not an either or scenario. You don't need to do an origin story to incorporate the heart and soul of the Spider-Man character into this portrayal. Especially
having introduced them so well and unexpectedly in Civil War. I like a scene. I like the Washington Monument rescue scene in Spider-Man. I want to see him do that kind of stuff.
That's probably the best scene in the film, yeah. And I thought Michael Keaton was pretty good as the Vulture, but I don't like the tech version of the Vulture either.
No, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And then the fourth film that I would rank, grade 5 out of 10 would be the first Captain America film.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah. Just don't really care for any of that period stuff. And then that brings us into the 15th best MCU film, Doctor Strange.
Adapted from television.
Don't really care for any of its sort of iconography and whatever. And then Captain America: The Winter Soldier next. I like Scarlett Johansson's presence in that, and I like Bucky and that sort of arc, but otherwise, whatever. Then we'll get into the first Thor film. Then Black Panther is my number 12, and then my number 11 is my lowest ranked film. That's a 7 out of 10, which is the first Iron Man film.
Okay. So
that's my 19 to 11.
I'll give you 19 to 11. I just threw this together right before we started recording, and if I did it an hour from now or tomorrow, it would probably be slightly different, but more or less, these are more or less the places. So these are the ones that I rate 4 out of 10.
Okay.
At number 19, we have Thor: The Dark World.
Oh, wow. Okay, good.
Which is the same as yours, right?
In agreement, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the only thing I will say is that I think that the climactic battle sequence in that film is really, really cool, where they're fighting and sending each other hurtling through the portals to the different worlds.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool, but everything else in that film, the way people talk about Marvel movies having forgettable villains? I was reading an article about that, and then I was kind of going through the films in my head, trying to see if I agreed with that. And when I got as far as, I was kind of going, yep, all the way through. And then when I got as far as Thor: The Dark World, I couldn't remember who the villain was. And when I looked him up, I looked at Google image searched him. I didn't even recognize him.
Who's the villain?
He's some sort of like dark elf or something, like a white-skinned dark elf.
Oh yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I can't even remember.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Really forgettable stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's number 19. I do think the final scene is good though. Then Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Okay.
I just hope that they put some sort of like meaningful, like, something substantial into the next one. Anyway, next one is Black Panther which is just
Okay.
like mystifyingly overrated in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But also, but the character himself is not interesting. He's boring. And,
No, of course he is. Yeah.
It falls into that Captain America Civil War thing of like being too kind of rooted in like the real world and no.
Yeah. Top three.
So,
Got a top
speaking-
three villain though.
The villain was okay, but again, the motivation that it's being kind of much applauded for is again too social commentary
Worldly.
based.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
Speaking of Captain America Civil War, that's the next one. So
Wow.
1917, 16. So my number 15 is
Wow.
Captain America Civil War. Tedious, with the exception of the airport fight scene, in which again I would complain about the color grading. But again,
That's
and
what
again, the
airports
best,
look like though.
yeah, but it's not what superheroes look like in my mind.
Yeah.
The highlight of the movie is Spider-Man and Ant-Man, and they're in there for no reason other than brand reinforcement. They have no story purpose in the movie, but they're the thing that stands out the most. Everything else in there, again, I just don't care if the Avengers fall out with each other. Next one is Avengers Age of Ultron.
Okay.
And then Avengers Infinity War.
Wow.
And then Iron Man 2.
Okay.
Those are
Iron Man
4
2.
those are 4 out of 10.
Those are all 4 out of 10.
Yeah, well, so 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13. So Iron Man 2 is my 13th. And then we go up to 5 out of 10 for number 12, and that's The Incredible Hulk. And then my number 11 is Iron Man 3.
Wow. Iron Man 2 is my number 10.
Okay.
I like Cheadle, his introduction. I like Sam Rockwell as like the secondary villain, and Pepper Potts, massive fan of Pepper Potts. big fan. As played by Gwyneth Paltrow at least. And then my number 9 is Ant-Man. These are all 7s, by the way. My number 8 is Iron Man 3. Ben Kingsley, Guy Pearce. I like the climatic sequence. I like Cheadle again.
Were you not incensed by the Ben Kingsley joke? Trivializing the Mandarin. huge point of controversy that many people have not forgiven Marvel for.
Oh, really?
5 years later.
See, I didn't know the origins of the source material for the Mandarin.
He's a kind of like Chinese, sort of arch villain, kind of like a Moriarty kind of type, I think, or like a Lex Luthor type, like somebody like that, without superpowers necessarily, or maybe I'm wrong, actually. I think he has rings of power, whatever it is. Anyway, he was regarded as culturally insensitive by Marvel, so they decided to take the piss out of him instead.
Okay.
But then they backpedaled, apparently, and there's a short film called Hail to the King that they did, which implies that there is a real Mandarin out there somewhere.
But is that part of the MCU?
Yeah. But the fans were so incensed that they just had to,
wow,
extinguish those fires.
So my number 7 is Age of Ultron. My number 6 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
Mm-hmm.
Top 5, right? Here's my top 5.
Are these all still 7s?
Actually, no. Yeah. They're all 7s from now on. We don't have an 8.
Okay.
Give me your 10 to 6.
Okay, sorry, my 10 to 6. So my number 10 is Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay.
Which I think is actually revisited it before Guardians 2 came out, and liked it a little bit less than I had the first time I saw it. I think the humor is extremely uneven, like it's really hit and miss, and I think it has arguably the worst villain in the entire thing, Ronan. The something or other. He's like some just absolutely generic warlord who wants to conquer places. Him and the elf from Thor: The Dark World are the 2 worst villains in the whole series. What's her name? Is Ronan. Anyway,
Ronan Keating.
Yeah, that's all I could think of.
Yeah.
Okay, so my number 9. My number 9 is Doctor Strange. Again, really uneven. Like the jokes in it are terrible, and the third act, the way that they introduce all this stuff really late, and the whole Dormammu thing and everything is kind of cool in itself, but like it's just structurally a complete mess. But
good villain. How's a good villain?
Which one?
Well, the what's his name from Denmark? What's he called? Fucking hell, Mads Mikkelsen.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's my number 9. My number 8 is Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, mostly I kind of like the kind of the fish out of water, man out of time kind of theme in that movie, and yeah. And then my number, so that's 10, 9, 8. So number 7, Thor Ragnarok.
Okay.
Pretty funny, pretty stylish, pretty incoherent as well. You know, like a big detour off to this planet where it's basically the plot function of that planet, the Jeff Goldblum planet, which was pretty fun again in itself, but it really just means that Thor needs to be away from Asgard, so it could be anything. You know, he could be gone anywhere.
Yeah.
It's weird that the central conflict is between him and Hela, but it's not given that much kind of screen time. It's just like, we're going to spend like an hour on this other planet. Anyway. Next one up is, my number 6 is Thor, the first one. Bearing in mind that I haven't seen these films since they came out, so like again, if I were to revisit them like you and watch them all over the course of the next 3 days, I'm sure my ranking would change.
No,
but...
hence your ridiculous rankings.
So
my
that's
my number 5 is the Avengers. I think it has the best villain in Loki, and it introduces Ruffalo to us as well. Who,
I really like Ruffalo.
Having really enjoyed Edward Norton though in the otherwise
I like Norton as well.
Forgettable first one. I like Ruffalo a lot. Number 4, Civil War, because I think it has the best standalone. Actually, Avengers, the action sequence on the airship where like Hulk's just getting unleashed, and it's the first time we see all of them sort of together in the same sort of action scene. Yeah. I really like that.
That is good,
but the airport sequence in Captain America: Civil War is my favorite standalone action scene, I think, in the whole series.
Do you think it would still be if you took Spider-Man and Ant-Man out of it?
Well, perhaps not, but they are, so it is.
Yeah, but they're there. They're like that. That's the scene that everybody talks about in Civil War. But everything else in that movie is boring.
See, now I like the whole climactic thing as well, where Stark and Captain America and Bucky are all having a kind of a physical three-way. They're having a three-way. And then my number 3 would be Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay. The first one?
I think the first one. I don't know why I really was enjoying the second one, and I love Michael Rooker in it. And for some reason, maybe just like not trusting my own positivity towards it, I kind of nudged it down a few spaces. Or places, and retained Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, as a top 3er. Number 2, Avengers Infinity War.
Wow. I've forgotten all of the films that you've ranked, so I have no idea what your number 1 is now.
Give me your 5 to 2.
My 5 is Iron Man, the first one.
Okay.
Haven't seen it since 2008, but
okay.
Thought it was pretty fun the first time. Terrible ending. Jeff Bridges spontaneously becomes Ironmonger or something like that, and it's just whatever.
Rest in peace, Terrence Howard.
Yeah. Next one is Captain America: The First Avenger.
Okay.
Yeah. Kind of more like I mentioned earlier that I just rewatched The Rocketeer, also directed by Joe Johnston, and I think that's probably the reason that he was hired to direct that one. Which is, it kind of has. I love the stuff at the beginning when he's like going on tour, to motivate the troops, and it's just kind of pulpy and fun, and Hugo Weaving as Red Skull is fun, and like I don't like the way they chickened out on the Nazi thing. there's no Nazism apparent in it. They just kind of replaced it with Hydra. Hail Hydra. Yeah. Okay, next up is the Avengers, the first one. Or maybe I would swap them and put Captain America above the Avengers. Yeah, let's do that actually. Let's make Avengers number 4 and the first Avenger number 3.
Right.
And then number 2 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which I think is arguably the only film. Again, the biggest. If I could fix one thing about the movie, it would be the jokes that go on and on and on and are not funny. And it's like Marvel are afraid of committing to an emotional moment. Like there's a scene where Nebula is talking about her relationship to Thanos, and you just know there's some shit joke coming, and then the camera just pans across to I forget, it's James Gunn's brother playing this character, and he says something like, "Well, good luck with all that." What am I watching? Like, it's some shit sitcom. But aside from that aspect of it, it's the only one that has a sense of like being concerned with like themes that are character based, and like I think I think visually, thematically, in terms of like the characterization, and even in terms of the jokes, actually, it's superior to the first one, and definitely in terms of the villain. Like Ego the Living Planet is a really cool villain, and the whole backstory with how he killed Peter's mother and all that kind of stuff, gave her cancer. It's cool, and again, I think Michael Rooker is fantastic in it. I like the sisters' relationship between Gamora and Nebula as well. I think Karen Gillan as Nebula is really, really good. And actually, that's something that I wanted to mention before that I forgot about with Infinity War, is the scene where Thanos is torturing Nebula is so dark. I was left wondering, like, what is the rating on this movie? You know, like, this is not suitable for kids
like
at all.
Pulling
her apart, and she's screaming. It's really disturbing. And
you know what? Let's. I'm gonna put it up there as well. It's higher than a 6 for me. But it's still not my favorite. Okay.
So your number one?
My number one is Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I saw you grimacing when I was criticizing it there.
Yeah, I was. I think it's like the funniest. It's the funnest, and it has one of the best villains as well in Hela.
Hela is good, but she's underserved though. Like, why is there an hour-long detour in the middle of the movie where Hela has no bearing?
You know, the whole thing on Goldblum's planet.
Yeah.
Like, that could just be a film in itself. It doesn't
need
to have that, like, end-of-the-world scenario, you know? That's what
absolutely.
we want. We want fun, episodic,
absolutely
standalone films that don't even, touch upon the end of a planet or the Earth or whatever else. They don't need it, you know?
Give us what we want, Marvel.
So your first one is
Ant-Man.
Ant-Man.
Yeah. I wish Edgar Wright had directed it, but I think that there's, like, he left the project late enough in the day that it's very obvious that, like, he had already done extensive work on pre-visualization, designing the action sequences. Right, obviously he still has a screenwriting credit. And just like the inherent, I mean, he doesn't even turn into the giant version of himself in that movie, so that's to come in Ant-Man 2. But you know, the whole thing with like, I mean, I'll give you an example. The scene where he's fighting, I forget the villain's name in that. He's just like a bad version of Ant-Man. They're fighting in the suitcase or the briefcase that's falling from the helicopter, and great. It's in zero gravity, and they accidentally turn on the iPod and it starts playing the Cure Disintegration, and like, it's just really cool. And the fight in the girl's bedroom at the end where things are becoming huge, and Thomas the Tank Engine and the giant ant and everything. It's just like so visually and conceptually creative.
So that what you just mentioned about Guardians of the Galaxy's jokes, like undercutting and like with like bathos and like to a kind of grating degree. Ant-Man does it in a visual, very creative way where, like, you know, you've got the from Ant-Man's perspective, the action scenes unfolding in the end of world scenario tonality that these things do, and then it cuts to, like, from the perspective of his daughter, and it's like, Thomas the Tank's just like falling over. And I
also quite liked, although I wish that they had committed more to it, but the what is it called? The subspace kind of realm that they go into. You know, the way when they shrink down too much and they go subatomic.
Oh,
and he goes into this like this kind of like weird floating abstract space.
Yeah, like something like from Interstellar.
Yeah, and it's like they don't stay there long enough. They don't have, like, again, they're probably afraid of like a quiet moment as well, where he's just out of it too quickly, you know. But no, that's definitely my number one, and Guardians 2 is my number 2 for sure. And then after that is a rough order, but you could definitely swap the adjacent films on any other day.
Sure.
Particularly if I revisited them, I'm sure. Okay, do you want to wrap it up there?
Should we move on?
Move on to Jason and the Argonauts.
Welcome to Olympus, Jason.
Ah, Jason come to Mount Olympus at last. No man calls upon the gods unless he wants something. We arranged for you to be brought here by Hermes.
I wouldn't have believed a mortal could ask the help of the gods, much less visit them.
Well, at least you're honest. which is more than I can say for most other mortals. What is it you want? A ship? A crew?
No. Those I can find myself.
Oh, and what are you going to use in place of gold?
The hearts of men.
I am Hera, queen of the gods, and your protector on this voyage. But my lord Zeus has decreed a limit to the number of times I may help you when you call upon me. Do not speak now. I know what you must ask of me. Does the golden fleece exist? And if so, where is it?
That's 2 questions.
And I shall help him with only one answer. Search in the land of Colchis.
Then it does exist. But Colchis, that's the end of the world.
Okay, so Jason and the Argonauts, directed by Don Chaffee, but also by an uncredited Ray Harryhausen, produced by Charles H. Schneer, written by Beverly Cross and Jan Reed, based on the 3rd century BCE epic poem, The Argonautica, by Apollonius Orodius, shot in 1961, with Harryhausen having to spend another year on the animations and visual effects, and was released in mid-1963 by Columbia Pictures. Okay, the plot.
Give me the plot.
So King Pelias is given a prophecy by the god Zeus that he misinterprets and takes to mean that he's destined to become the king of Thessaly. So he leads an army to Thessaly. He kills King Aristo and most of his family, but the infant Jason is taken away by one of Aristo's soldiers. Pelias kills one of the king's daughters in the temple of Hera, which angers the goddess Hera, who then decides to become Jason's protector. And she also warns Pelias to beware of a man wearing one sandal. So she gives him another prophecy. And then 20 years later, the grown-up Jason saves Pelias from drowning, and loses his sandal in the river. So Pelias recognizes this is the man wearing one sandal. And Jason doesn't know Pelias' identity, so he tells him his plan to take back the throne from Pelias, and that his plan involves finding the legendary Golden Fleece, which Pelias encourages him to do without revealing his identity. Pelias encourages him to do this because he hopes that Jason won't make it back from the adventure, and Jason is brought to Mount Olympus, where he speaks with Zeus and Hera. Hera tells Jason that Zeus has decreed that she can only help him on his journey 5 times, so he can ask for her aid 5 times. And she tells him to search for the fleece in the land of Colchis, which is a distant land on the other side of the ocean. Zeus offers Jason his help, but Jason says that he can do it himself. He doesn't need the help of the gods. He can organize the voyage, build a ship, and assemble a crew. So he holds a kind of heroes' games to find the bravest, strongest men in all of Greece, and he gets a ship built by a guy named Argus. The ship is called the Argo, and the crew that he eventually assembles are called the Argonauts, and they embark on their voyage to find the Golden Fleece.
So what happens at the end of the film, Bobby?
Well, so actually, we'll come to that, because there really isn't much of an ending. So
yeah, that's suggests that that's a lot of the story time, though, doesn't it? This synopsis. It's one of those, because it's rooted in Greek mythology and is an epic poem in itself. The source material, it covers kind of a lot of ground. I mean, like the first sequence, we get Pelias in the temple of Hera on Thessaly, killing one of the king's daughters. Or does he kill them both, or does he kill one? I can't remember.
He kills
Briseis and
Briseis, yeah. Well, he kills her in
Philomena.
But he kills Briseis in the temple, doesn't he?
Yeah. So which by the way is an exceptionally violent scene.
Sure.
For a film that was made in 1963. He's not mucking about, nor is the story or the filmmakers or the scriptwriters, because we go straight into like 20 or at least decades later.
Yeah, 20 years later, yeah.
Yeah, it is 20 years later. And so that's the setup, not much has happened in between where to glean from that. Jason returns wearing one shoe. And because this is a film in which the set pieces are the true kind of attractions.
Right, sure.
How familiar were you, just to continue a little bit with the story, like how familiar are you with Greek literature of this ilk?
I mean, I know a lot of the stories and the characters, but I don't know the way it all kind of fits together. Like
Right.
you just said, like not much happens in the 20 years, but I'm sure that there are a lot of stories that are kind of
Absolutely,
'cause the way there are a few sort of major texts, even though this is mythology, and obviously a lot of it is are folk stories. They're sort of canonized in these few major texts, like these histories and epic poems that do have a kind of a degree of continuity, like what happens to Jason in this story. Like I was going to say at the end, when we have Jason and Medea, in love, escaping from Colchis with the fleece. It's kind of funny that it ends on that buoyant note,
He never
because
gets to return. Yeah.
but also Medea ends up killing Jason in Medea.
Oh right.
Right. So
Yeah.
So a little bit from like when I was a kid, when I used to have illustrated books of these like myths and legends and stuff, but I would have a difficulty differentiating between what is Greek and what is Roman, because the Roman stuff is so like Hercules, for example, in this film is called Hercules, but Hercules is the Roman name and Heracles is the Greek name.
Right.
So yeah, how about you?
It's a bit like a prototype for the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm sure that's been commented on and written about. No, to answer your question, I seem to be a lot less familiar with the stories and stuff, and it's weird because so the kind of vague familiarity you have with the source material, I feel like I have with these kinds of films, because they're very much Sunday afternoon films, a little bit like Towering Inferno, which we covered a few episodes back. So, and they're known for their set pieces, for their special effects, for the scenes that always happen to be on television when you tune in as a kid. And they always seem to be longer than they are. I mean, this is a lean, this clock's in at less than 90 minutes?
No, it's more. It's 105 minutes.
Is it? All right.
Yeah. 100 minutes.
Okay. But anyway, it's pretty lean for a film that
for what it contains.
Yes, I mean, if a film of this ilk was made today, it would be at least 2.5 hours, one would think, and yet would be taking itself a lot more seriously if it was to be made today, I think.
Right. I mean, there was a remake of the Ray Harryhausen Clash of the Titans was made in 1981.
Sure.
And there was a remake of that with Sam Worthington and Liam Neeson as Zeus in 2010. And you're right.
Did you see that?
It wasn't very good.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. So it's like much more serious, much more. Yeah.
I mean, the production value of this, it's pretty low budget film.
It's very low budget, yeah.
Independently made, Anglo-American production. So, on the one hand, you've got this like sort of charming lo-fi quality to it in the performances and the dialogue and the line deliveries and whatever else, which ostensibly might be taken as not comical enough. Because on the other hand, some of it's like really like very, very funny, sometimes unintentionally, often intentionally, but it's I found myself a little bit disoriented early on in terms of how I was meant to be kind of taking it, because obviously it's rooted in very serious literature, and yet a literary mode that has very much been kind of outmoded, I guess.
Right.
Do you find yourself like charmed by it, laughing at it, or?
Yeah, I think the elements of it that are quaint are charming, and I think that the like you mentioned, the visual effects sequences, the set pieces being the main attraction. Like the film, like most of the Harryhausen's films, was written and designed around those sequences, and several of the sequences that he had in mind were cut due to the budget.
Right.
Like there was supposed to be like a scene with a centaur, a scene with Cerberus, the three-headed dog from the guards Hades, and the sea monsters Scylla and Charybdis. So yeah, those sequences though, like I was thinking about this, like it's kind of funny to say, because to compare it to, like, if you were to talk about the 2010 Clash of the Titans and say, as I don't think anyone did, but like, you know, there are plenty of examples of films nowadays where you might say that, you know, the visual effects are amazing, but that's it, you know, and to say that is always kind of taken negatively. You know, like it's deficient in character and story and theme and ideas and everything, but the visual effects are there. But the craft and the detail and like the love in the visual effects sequences in this are like, that is why you're watching it. Like, that's certainly all the visual effects sequences in this for me were just absolutely, like, I watched that skeleton sequence like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, the also the cinematography as well of Wilkie Cooper, like that again. Like, so whenever it was on television, it would often coincide with the actual light outside getting dark on a Sunday afternoon, and some of the exteriors here are shot in such low lighting that on television, you know, where the bad broadcast versions, you would often be like, "What's happening here?" You know,
like a lot of them are shot day for night.
Yeah. It's quite amazing. But I mean, you know, you've got like Honor Blackman here as Hera, but then on the other hand, you've got like Todd Armstrong as Jason, dubbed by Tim Turner, who's like kind of terrible as this. You know, it's really kind of like a hokey, just dead wooden performance by him. I did chuckle at the idea of Jason just being a little bit dim-witted. So firstly, I chuckled at the idea of all of the gods, Zeus, Hera, are kind of just literally looking down from the sky through this like screen-like apparition-like pond, and they're just having a mess. They mess about, just like, so arbitrarily, I can only help you 5 times. Arbitrarily, I am going to tell Pelias, I'm going to warn you about him, even though I'm your protector. Like, Zeus just like, I'm just going to mess about a bit here and just have a bit of a laugh.
But like that, so that's true to the myths though.
Yeah.
Where like you know, because like again, another comparison with the same kind of film made today. The characters, like if there was a film made about Jason today, he would be psychologized. He would have a complex psychology and complex motivations. But here you have, as in the myths, you have these like psychologically uncomplicated characters with simple motivations and simple sort of understandings of their place in the world as kind of playthings for the gods. Like these people with simple lives whose the gods preside over them and toy with them and gift them and punish them. I mean that I actually like that because of its sort of, you know, authenticity.
It's just it gives it a little hokey quality when that's cinematized. I guess it's, you know, to dramatize that, it's a few people on stage in the same physical setting. To cinematize it in the way that this film, obviously, in the way that this medium can, and needs to, it dates the film, doesn't it? I mean, like, to have them just sitting around looking into this, you know, like almost like literally like at some point, like I thought it's almost like what's happening to Jason is happening in some kind of fish tank.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just like literally there in the room with them, and they're just looking at them.
But they literally have a game board with like play pieces, like, you know, that they're moving around.
That is sort of abandoned after a certain point, because obviously what happens to Jason and his crew needs to have some sort of dramatic investment, and in order for that to happen, you know, for the set pieces, we can't keep cutting back to the gods. I mean, we do, you know, occasionally, but it does become less and less frequent, doesn't it, as the film goes on? Yeah,
it does, So let's talk about there are sort of 5, would we say 5? 5 major sort of visual effects set pieces. Right, so the first one is Talos.
Yeah.
Right, where
the bronze statue.
The bronze statue, where they land on the I forget the name of the island, but they land on this island and they're warned by Hera to only take provisions, don't take anything else from the island. And Hercules, who just to go back to Hercules, actually, in the heroes games that they have at the beginning, the scene where Hercules is introduced, I thought was really surprising, because he's demonstrating his tremendous strength, and this kind of like slight kind of skinny guy
he's
comes
undermined
over
immediately.
Yeah, but he's like you think that Hercules is going to like make fun of this guy, or when this guy shows him up, that he's going to be put out by it or whatever. But it's played exactly against expectations. Like Hercules is just like the nicest guy in the world, and like so proud of the little guy. They have a competition where they throw a discus. And Hercules throws it, and he throws it really far, and the other guy uses his wits, and he skims it on the water.
It's the Isle of Bronze on which they...
The Isle of Bronze, okay. So they're told that those two characters become really good friends, which plays into the end of this sequence. And also Hercules and all of the Argonauts, they're not like what you would expect. Like when you compare it to a similar kind of film made today, when you think of like 300 or something like that, and like the physiques of the characters in those films. Yeah. These characters are not, and apparently these are very kind of like ordinary looking people.
Oh yeah, there's now on him.
Yeah, and it's like apparently this was made. There were a lot of like Italian, what were called muscle men movies that were coming out at the time, and a lot of them dealt with Greek mythology. They were like sword and sandal movies, and Harryhausen wanted, like when they were casting Hercules, he did not want anything that suggested those Italian-produced muscle man movies.
Oh, really?
So that was a deliberate choice to cast them in kind of like more sort of average physiques.
Yeah, I mean, like Jason looks more like Chris Evans before he becomes Captain America.
Okay, so anyway, they land on the Isle of Bronze. They're warned not to take anything but provisions, and then Hercules and Hylas, the small guy who beat Hercules at the discus throw, they go off on their own. They're chasing a goat. And they happen across these big chambers full of the treasure of the gods, and so these like giant oversized pearls, and Hercules takes a giant brooch pin, which he says would make a good javelin. When they take it out of the chamber, the giant statue of the god Talos comes to life and starts attacking the Argonauts. What did you think of this sequence?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I don't think I'd seen. We'll come to the iconic sequence that I think everybody's seen at least stills from. I don't think I've seen the sequence before, which surprised me, because when it did happen, it's very well done. So you get a really nicely composed shot that scales the men in relation to the statue. Yeah, and there's a few moments where the relation in size between them is lost a little bit, but for the most part, it's very much sustained, and the sense of peril. And I mean, he's terrifying, Talos, because he doesn't have any eyes, because he's a statue. Yeah,
actually, Harry hasn't talked about that like, and this is true. Like, so like when you watch films like I don't know, Troy or Gladiator or whatever, things that are set in like ancient Rome. And you see the statues that they have where they have no arms and they're just marble white. Like, they weren't like that at the time. They had arms and they were painted like gaudy colors. But the paint has worn away and the arms have broken off over time. And it's this weird kind of postmodern sort of postmodern notion of authenticity, where like inverted authenticity, where if you were to depict it in a film the way it actually was in reality, it would seem fake. I get it. You'd be looking at the statues going, why are they painted? I'm like, what? That's so weird. And the same thing with the bronze statues. They would have had like eyes of like a softer metal, or like a white something that has eroded or been stolen over time. But he would look weird with that. It's a nice touch. Yeah, because Talos is corroded, right? His whole body, because he's made of bronze. So you're saying to me then, if they were to remake this,
then the statue Talos would be chasing them all without any arms because of that false sense of.
No, I'm talking about the marble statues that you would see.
Right, okay.
You know, like the white, like the Venus de Milo, kind of, that kind of thing. But like,
yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, so they figure out how to defeat Talos is to sort of unstop this thing in his heel.
Yeah.
Where it will.
So you mentioned like Hera has 5 questions that Jason can ask her, right? Is this the first question that he asks her? Like,
no, he asks her. I think it's the second.
It's like when you get Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? On that show, and you get like 3 you ask a friend, phone a friend, ask the audience, or 50-50, and like somebody really early on in their quest for £1 million has used up 2 of their lifelines like immediately. Like Jason,
he burns through them, all right.
Questions away. So anyway, I think his second question. This is what I meant when I said he's a little bit dim-witted, because Hera says, go for the ankles, and he's like, the ankles, really incredulously, like, yeah, of course you fucking go for the ankles.
Yeah, and it drains out the ichor, which is the blood of the gods.
Yeah.
So his blood flows out, and he dies very painfully. A lot of writhing and clutching at his throat and everything, and he cracks and he falls forward and he crushes Hylas, but nobody sees Hylas die. So when the Argonauts are leaving the island, Hercules refuses to go with them. He's going to stay on the island. He's convinced that Hylas is still alive. Hera tells Jason that Hylas is dead. Hercules doesn't believe and just stays on the island. And Hera says, yeah, he's not fated to go any further with you, which is true to the myth. But, as in a lot of these kinds of stories, there's a kind of, again, like what I said about the sort of simple people with the simple motivations and stuff, there's a sort of a disconnect between what you might expect in a story now, like a certain kind of like psychological relatability, and what made sense at the time in those stories. But again, I like the fidelity to this departs in many ways from the source texts, but in spirit it's very faithful, I think.
So then we've got the second sort of set piece, which is smaller in scale but actually more terrifying for me, involving harpies, I think they're called, right?
Harpies, yeah.
So the Argonauts reached the realm of King Phineus, who's blind. He's already been blinded, right?
He's been blinded, and he's been blinded by the gods, and he is being tormented by harpies every night,
which are winged.
Winged kind of like
men, bird.
They're women. Harpies are women.
Oh, sorry.
So they're like, they're kind of like a bit like demons.
Yeah, but they're terrifying, right? I mean, they of course they anticipate the film I'm about to mention, but they also recall the film Wizard of Oz.
The flying monkeys,
with the flying monkeys, like just picking people up and flying off with them, which was obviously a source of terror in my childhood. And this scene would have been a source of terror had I watched it as a child.
Do you know how Harryhausen did this? How he constructed these sequences?
No.
So the actor playing the blind king, would be filmed, swinging his staff at something in the air,
right?
And that's what the sequence would consist of when it came to Harryhausen, and he would play it frame by frame, like he'd go through it frame by frame, and he would animate the stop motion harpies in front of the screen in such a way that their action lines up with the action of the actor. But remember,
right?
But it is. But remember also that the harpies physically interact with the actor. Yeah. So like, there's a scene where the actor falls on his back, and the harpy grabs like the sash that's wrapped around him and unfurls it, and it comes away like a scarf kind of in the air, and that live action element was pulled off of the actor by a string or a wire, right? And then Harryhausen had to line up the harpy with the action of the wire, right? So it's unbelievably meticulous.
I mean, I know how he did it now, but how did he do it?
I know exactly. That's and he alone did it.
Yeah.
It's like he worked alone. And then,
yeah.
bear that technique in mind when we come to talk about the skeleton sequence at the end.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
Okay,
I mean, it's just mind-boggling. But yeah, so the harpies, the king, the Argonauts need to find out the way to Colchis, and the king will tell them if they help him to, overcome the harpies, and they do. Do you want to explain how?
No. Well, they caged them, right?
They
devise like net, like
they cover the building, the like temple.
Yeah, it's like ruins of a.
It's like ruins of a temple.
Yeah.
Which the actors actually got up on top of them and like stood around the edge of it, which they wouldn't be allowed to do today.
Yeah.
But they they basically create a kind of an enclosure, a net enclosure, and drop the net on the harpies, and then they cage the harpies. And again, you feel a little bit sorry for the harpies.
Well, exactly. I mean, like, what? So they're just going to starve now? I mean, like, what?
No, he says they'll eat what you throw away, or something like that. But still, like, the harpies
as
are
long
just
as
gonna...
he throws it into the net.
No, they're living in the little cage at the end.
Yeah, but like, he has to still feed them though.
Yeah, he's going to feed them.
Yeah.
But I feel kind of sorry for the harpies.
What a life! Yeah. The humans just like create a trail of destruction in this film. And then we have clashing rocks.
Right, yeah. So the king directs them through the clashing rocks, which is like a kind of a very narrow passway between two kind of mountainsides. I guess. Yeah. This is probably the least impressive of the.
Do you think it's because it's just like plausibly real worldy? Stuck between a rock and hard place, and all the rocks just fall on them. Yeah,
and then they summon the sea god Triton to hold the rocks apart, but not before another ship is sunk by the falling rocks, and the sole survivor of that shipwreck is Medea, who is from Colchis, and then brings the Argonauts to Colchis, where en route, one of the Argonauts, Acastus, isn't it? Acastus? Yeah, Acastus, betrays Jason and tries to kill him, because Acastus is actually Pelias' son, who's been sent on the voyage to sabotage it. He jumps overboard when he's defeated by Jason, and anyway, they arrive in Colchis. They're welcomed by the king, but it turns out that the king knows that they plan to steal the Golden Fleece, because Acastus has got there before them somehow, and warned King Pelias, or sorry, not King Pelias, King Aeetes of Colchis, that the Argonauts are there to steal the Golden Fleece. And then they're all imprisoned, and Medea helps them out of the prison, and then they go to get the Golden Fleece, and the Golden Fleece is guarded by a Hydra. Yeah. Although in the myth, it's a dragon.
Is it?
Yeah, and the reason that the Hydra is from, I think the Hydra is from one of the Hercules myths.
Right.
But anyway, the reason that they chose the Hydra over the dragon was because Harryhausen felt that people had seen dragons on film before, and he wanted to do something different. They also Jason doesn't kill the dragon. Medea casts a spell on the dragon that puts it to sleep, and he's able to steal the fleece.
Right.
In this one, Jason fights the Hydra. One thing I'm a little bit disappointed in is that when I think of the Hydra, it's the serpent with 7 heads, but when you cut off one of its heads, 2 more grow in its place.
Yeah,
which they didn't do.
Yeah,
I'm sure because it was even more difficult, but. Still,
well, it would have blown the running time as well, because how do you kill something that
Well, he stabs it. He ends up stabbing it in the heart to kill it, but he doesn't cut off any of its heads.
They ran out of heads. Maybe
it seems that like you would, if you were to choose the Hydra, you would choose it because of the opportunity to do something like that it gives you. But anyway,
it's terrifying though.
It's
right?
It's a great sequence. Yeah,
it's you know what. Well, we'll mention it when we get to the next. We'll get to the next one, and then I'll mention it. But the next. So he kills Hydra. He kills
the Hydra, and King Aetes shows up, and actually, one more thing about the Hydra: the way that they match footage of the live action actors with because when the Hydra picks up the actors in its tail, the actor is then also a model, and then it's so well done.
Yeah, it really is.
But okay, so then Aetes shows up. They take the fleece. Aetes shows up and calls on the goddess Hecate to destroy the Hydra and give him the Hydra's teeth. He's then able to plant the Hydra's teeth, and the Hydra's teeth grow into these 7 skeleton warriors.
Grow very rapidly. We might
grow very rapidly out of the ground as skeleton warriors that the Argonauts then do battle with, and this is the most famous sequence in the film.
Yeah,
justifiably, because when you think back on what I was saying about how those sequences are constructed,
right.
Like the number of points of contact between the actors, like they're crossing swords with the skeletons. They're like, and it's 7 skeletons fighting. I think 4 Argonauts or 5 maybe. So you have one Argonaut fighting 2 different skeletons. They're running around in different areas, climbing up on top of objects.
Yeah, climbing
up on walls, like going behind. Like it's just I was watching the sequence over and over and over again, looking at all of the details in it. It's unbelievable. It's so good.
It's really great, and it reminds me, like the Hydra sequence, of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, the N64 game, which has to have been consciously indebted to this film.
Oh yeah,
I mean, the iconography it's playing with, even like stuff like the harp score of that, on like the menu screen, if you remember it, when it's like visuals of Hyrule, and then you've got like Link going on horseback across the fields. This is very it recalls the score of this film. Right.
The video game that this reminds me of more than anything else is the Golden Axe games on the Mega Drive.
Oh right, yeah.
With they had skeleton warriors and stuff. It's like very indebted to this, and to things like Conan the Barbarian and things like that. But yeah, like a combination of those like generic fantasy elements that like by that point in the late 80s, early 90s had been sort of they were no longer necessarily directly associated with any one source. Like, so they were no longer directly associated with Harryhausen or with Tolkien or something like that. They were sort of made generic and made sort of like commonly available. So you had like things like skeleton warriors and like like warrior princesses and wizards and all these kinds of like that kind of iconography was very was by that point circulating freely in popular culture. So you have these kind of generic uses of it, and for me, what I associate most strongly with it is Golden Axe.
Right, interesting. I love and marvel at a lot of the sequences that we're talking about. Do I like this film? Yes, ultimately yes. I mean, I could never bring myself to say I dislike. I mean, it's so charming and like so admirable, and as you said, so much craft and love and investment has gone into it without ever taking itself all that seriously. So yes, I have to. I'm presuming you do as well.
Yeah, I really like it. Yeah.
And on the strength of this, would you watch or buy the Blu-ray box set that Indicator released in the UK recently, the Harryhausen box set?
Is it all of his films?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh, hold on, let me just check that. Yeah, it is. It's The Wonderful Worlds of Ray Harryhausen, Volume 1, 1955 to 1960. And then presumably there's a Volume 2 as well, I reckon. Only £43 as I'm looking at it on their official
1960,
website.
So that doesn't include this one.
No, it wouldn't include. And they also released a Sinbad trilogy box set as well.
This was Harryhausen's.
Volume 2 is 61 to 64. Sorry.
Okay. All right, but it doesn't go any further than that. Or maybe they plan to at some point, because Harryhausen obviously worked up into the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah.
This was Harryhausen's favorite of his own films. Yeah, just one more thing on the skeleton scene.
Yeah.
The original concept was not to have skeletons, but to have corpses, like rotting, like almost like zombies. But they were afraid that they would get an X rating if it was too scary. And in that same vein, the scene was originally conceived as taking place at night, but they had it take place during the day because also it was conceived as being too scary.
Right, interesting.
And it took him 4 months to animate the skeleton scene.
Yeah, it's proper like midday sunshine, in it, where the scene in which it takes place.
Yeah,
because they could have shot it day for night again, but
it would have been they figured it would get an X rating. Yeah,
wow. But I can't envisage it with zombie like corpses.
No, I mean
it makes
the skeletons
much
are
more
great.
sense as skeletons, right?
Yeah,
because it's like it's ghoulish, but it's also kind of like it's that like boniness of skeletons, like the transparency of them, but also like the dexterity of them as well, and the fleshless physicality of them.
And they give them real sort of malevolent faces as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But think of how difficult it. Like, there are shots where the Argonauts stick their sword into the ribcage of the skeleton and then let go of their sword. So that has to be a live action actor holding a live action sword that Harry has, and then has to hide behind a plate or something like that.
Yeah.
And then cut. Like, it's you're just watching it in like watching these minute details, trying to see the seams, and like it's just unbelievably well made. So the last thing I wanted to say about this is that isn't it weird that we don't get any resolution with King Pelias? Like that's the inciting incident. It's the thing that sets the whole story in motion, and Jason's express mission is to come back and reclaim his throne and to kill Pelias. We go through the whole rigmarole of getting the fleece. We're not even really told why he needs the fleece.
Of course.
If he's able to summon an army, like able to organize like an army of Argonauts who are capable of like defeating all of these like monsters along the way, you'd think he'd be able to defeat King Pelias directly, but
you could be forgiven with 10 minutes to go of the running time if you're the type to look at your watch during a film to think, well, how's he going to get back in time?
I did. I was watching. I was like, we're going to really speed through that resolution, and instead, what we get is Zeus saying, "Oh, Jason's journeys are not over yet. Like, I have more plans for him."
Yeah, which suggests sequels were intended.
According to Harryhausen, they weren't.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's weird.
I like that.
Anyway,
what would you give it out of 10?
I suppose I'd give it a 7, but I don't know. Like, if I was just talking about the visual effects sequences, it'd be like a 10. So,
I was going to say, I thought you were going to say, but if I was to discuss the visual effects sequences alongside the story, it would maybe be a 6.
Oh, okay.
But it's definitely a 7 for you. Yeah, it's 1 star, so 7, 6, 7, something like that.
Okay.
It's definitely it's worthy and valuable, and I think the amount of time we've spent discussing it was a lot longer than I expected as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so we move on. Move on to Psycho 2.
Well, you must be Norman Bates. I'm Warren Toomey.
Mary, why don't you go up to the house? The front door's open.
Is something wrong with the room?
No, just go up and wait for me, okay?
Look, it doesn't matter.
Just do as I say, okay?
She's pretty cute. Where'd you find her?
What's this stuff?
Say it was drugs.
What about the occupied cabins? Is that what's going on in there, too?
Yeah. Well, this town. If it isn't the parents, it's the kids. I caught a couple of them screwing in the basement of your house up there last week. Of course, I threw them right out. Can you believe that?
What kind of a motel are you running here?
The kind that makes money. People come here to party. They stay a few hours and then they leave. What more are you gonna ask from a motel so far from the beaten track, huh?
You're fired.
Hey, you can't fire me. I was hired by the hospital board.
The state has no claim on me or my property anymore, and neither do you. I want you out of here tomorrow.
Yeah, well, why don't you try putting me out, Mr. Wacko? I'd like to see that.
I won't have to.
I'll just go to the police. I'm sure they'd be very interested in what's been going on here, especially the drugs.
Tomorrow, Mr. Toomey. And don't rent out any more rooms in this motel. No more. At least my customers have a good time. What'd yours get, Bates, huh? Dead! That's what they got! Dead! Murdered by you loony!
Okay, so Psycho 2, directed by Richard Franklin, written by Tom Holland, who's best known now not for playing Spider-Man, but for directing Fright Night and Child's Play. Released in June of 1983 by Universal, grossed just over $35 million against its $5 million budget, and as a result we got 2 further sequels. We got 1986's Psycho 3 and 1990's Psycho 4 The Beginning, which was produced for television. Okay. Psycho 2 picks up 22 years after the events of Psycho and sees Norman Bates, again played by Anthony Perkins, released from custody having been declared restored to sanity. He's set up with a job as a cook in a local diner and befriends a young woman named Mary Samuels, played by Meg Tilly. When Mary is left without a place to spend the night after breaking up with her boyfriend, Norman offers to let her stay in his motel. FOC, of course, free of charge. Mary and Norman's developing friendship and Norman's return to the home he shared with his mother starts to raise old demons and put a strain on Norman's restored sanity. Complicating things further are Warren Toomey, played by Dennis Franz, the state-appointed manager of the Bates Motel in Norman's absence, and who Norman fired on his return after discovering that Toomey was running the motel primarily as a hookup spot for teenagers. And also Lila Loomis, played by Vera Miles, also returning from Psycho, who is the widow of Norman's victim Sam Loomis, and who wants Norman recommitted. Both Toomey and Lila are harassing Norman in their own ways, adding to the pressure building inside him, and when people start meeting grisly ends around the Bates Motel, has Mother finally returned? Ooh.
Well, has she? Because I haven't watched this one, so... No, you've seen Psycho 3 and 4, right?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, I see. I had to be reminded that 4 even existed. I knew 3 did, but for some reason in my mind, I'd misremembered the fact that Franklin directed this one. I thought Anthony Perkins had directed this one.
Yeah, Perkins directed the third one.
Yeah, so I haven't seen the third. I know that it begins with kind of a Vertigo style homage, right? And then Cold Water Music by AM.
Let's not just skip over Psycho 2.
No, honestly, okay. I haven't seen it now. I'm joking. So where do we begin? I mean,
where indeed? Okay, so I suppose we will begin with the spoiler.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, so I asked, has Mother finally returned, and the answer is no. The answer is no, and what's actually happening here is that Mary Samuels is really Mary Loomis, Lila Loomis's daughter, and they have conspired to... they've orchestrated this situation where Mary is now living with Norman, and Mary and Lila are calling Norman and pretending to be his mother, and they are dressing up in the dress and the wig and like standing in the window when he's down at the motel and basically trying to, push him. Like he's already kind of teetering on the edge, like he's not having returned to his childhood home. He's not altogether stable already, and they're attempting to push him over the edge and get him recommitted.
Yeah, and yet so that for a large chunk of this film, there is an ambiguity there, though, right? As to like who is doing it.
Yeah, that was an ultimate spoiler.
Yeah. But then, even when it's revealed, though, that Loomis' mother and daughter are conniving, there's still some sort of mystery in terms of like who's doing the killings, right? Or who has been doing the killings?
No. So who do you think has been doing the killings?
So, because I thought the spoiler wasn't going to be that. I thought the spoiler was the twist at the end. So, like when Emma Spool, the diner manager,
right. Yeah. played by Claudia Breyer.
Yeah, when she shows up and sits down in the kitchen as Norman goes about doing whatever he's doing, and she then reveals herself to be his real mother.
His real mother, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that she gave birth to him, and then Mrs. Bates, Norma Bates,
yeah, from the first film,
from the first film, took Norman in and raised him because she was committed.
Yeah,
she was mentally unstable, and right. Well, okay, so that's the thing. She's the one who's been killing everybody.
Yes.
Right, so there's no ambiguity there. Like it is her.
But until she reveals that to be the case, the large chunk of the film is there's an ambiguity in terms of like so the film itself sort of unfolds as a sort of mystery.
Yeah, the film is a mystery. Yeah,
a mystery unfolding from the perspective of the potential perpetrator.
Sure.
Who is unstable enough?
And we have throughout the film, we have. What do we have? 4 different people who are dressing up as mother. So it's kind of this like this like hauntological kind of presence of like mother there, but like her not like it's not even like in the first film where her corpse is physically there. She's like she's not there at all, but she's there more than she's ever been. She's there times 4.
Right. And you've got people electing to be her, people who think she exists, people who think other people are her.
Yeah.
You've got Robert Loggia playing Dr. Bill Raymond, who shows up every so often, and at one point he's implicated in it.
It's quite long for what it is. Actually, it's longer than I remembered it being, but it's very tightly wound, and I don't think it's too long. I think it's really well paced and engaging throughout. And I also love. I'm going to get into Psycho 3 a little bit here as well, because just by contrast, Psycho 4 is kind of more of a standalone thing where it's like, it's more prequel than sequel. It's like, there's a framing narrative where Norman has been released again, and he's married, and his wife is expecting their first child, and he's worried that the child will inherit his mental issues.
Right.
And he's calling into a radio station where they're talking about matricide and serial killers and stuff, and he's telling his life story. But basically, because it's a prequel, it's not really a horror film, because it's just like his life with his domineering mother, and it's played by Olivia Hussey. Remember on our Black Christmas episode, I said that Psycho 4 was the film that I knew her from, not those highbrow Shakespeare, European Shakespeare adaptations, but no, the Psycho 4 telefilm is what I associate her with. Anyway, so that's more like a standalone thing, but Psycho 3 is very dependent on the events of Psycho 2.
Right.
But they're kind of counterpoints to each other, because obviously there are 23 years between Psycho and Psycho 2, and it picks up, it's set 22 years later, whereas Psycho 3 is set 1 month after Psycho 2. So it's a direct continuation of the events, and they both sort of approach the sort of legacy of Psycho in different ways, whereas where this one is it's the kind of classic Bates and switch, if you like.
Nicely done.
The idea of like, okay, all right. So Psycho has this reputation, or this status in film history as like when in sort of popular the popular narrative of like the evolution of the slasher film is that it started with Psycho, and then 18 years later you got Halloween. But plugging that Richard Knoll book Blood Money again, his argument in that book that's wrong, because that's not the way that cash in film production works. Like, you don't wait 18 years to cash in on the success of a film. You know, if a film is a hit and spawns a cycle, the cycle should be instantaneous. It should be like, quickly, we're going to cash in on this. You don't wait, you don't wait decades to do that. So, really, the teen slasher cycle begins with Halloween. It doesn't begin 18 years previously with Psycho. But the revival of Psycho is part of that slasher cycle. So 1983.
Sure.
It's kind of at the waning end of that first boom. And therefore, because of the status that Psycho has related in relation to Halloween and Friday the 13th and the more famous teen slashers of that period, Psycho 2 then comes with this weight of expectation that they completely subvert and upend. You know what I mean? Like,
in what sense do you mean?
I mean, in the sense of, like, you would expect the killer to be Norman Bates.
Right. I get
First
you.
of all, you would expect you might expect something more like a dark kind of character study, like a movie like Maniac or something like that, where you're kind of just spending a lot of time with, or indeed Deranged.
Oh fuck! I thought we'd go beyond that. Right? Okay.
Which is
we'll cover it one of these days on the podcast and put it to bed definitively. But until that happens,
but there are plenty of movies in that vein. But like a teen slasher is typically not a character study. It's usually some sort of mystery or mythology, like
sure.
a, you know, like some sort of ghost story type thing, like Jason Voorhees is, like, you know, whatever, or Freddy Krueger. But yeah, no, in every respect, I think like this really sort of it comes into, like, the script is very aware of what people would expect given when it's coming out and the reason that the film was produced in the first place, to cash in on these.
Yeah.
But you know, basically, like, okay, producers saying, all right, like, everybody loves Halloween and Friday the 13th and all these teen slasher movies. Let's give them a sequel to the film that, you know, quote unquote started it all. But it doesn't really give you what you would expect.
But started it all in such a way that it was a classic and therefore untouchable as well, right? In a way that, you know, the likes of Halloween,
sure,
as you said, their sequels came very, very quickly and very fast, and very thick. After they were made, Psycho has this canonical status outright, right? It may have or may not have spawned a genre, but it's not a genre film in the you know,
right,
in that sense of the word, right? And so when I was watching
Psycho, it's what Richard Knoll in that book calls a pioneer production,
right?
Which is the idea that it provides a new textual model, and that textual model will either result in a hit and therefore spawn a cycle of cash-in productions, or it won't. So like his lineage of the slasher movie begins with Black Christmas, but because it wasn't a hit, he calls that the pioneer production,
right?
And he calls Halloween a speculator production. So the idea that the producers of Halloween looked at the textual model provided by Black Christmas and said, okay, that wasn't a hit, but we still think that there's a possibility that it could be, so we're going to do it again and try again.
I get you. Yeah.
But until you have a pioneer production, and you can have a continuing sequence of speculator productions, but until either a pioneer production or a speculator production is a hit, it doesn't spawn the cycle. It doesn't result in the production of cash-in films. So Psycho would be classified as a pioneer production that didn't kick off a cycle.
Right. So when I
would recommend that book to anyone who's interested in genre studies, even if you're not particularly interested in slasher films. It's really, really interesting.
No, I mean, that's the second time you've mentioned it in as many as 13 episodes. I should definitely get to it because it sounds really fascinating. But what I was going to say is, watching Psycho 2 very early on, I found myself drawn to the Bates character, drawn to Norman as this, you know, source of poignance and empathy and sympathy. And I read into that a sort of meta element of the difficulties of approaching a sequel to something that's ostensibly untouchable because of its canonical status. So he's been released, and his difficulties in adjusting to society upon his release reflect and are mirrored by the film's own sort of difficulties in returning to that sort of universe. Right. And I know that in a
completely different era,
absolutely,
in a different era with an eye on appealing to a completely different audience, with different expectations, and everything.
With like a younger audience in mind, with a younger cast. You know, he's visibly older than
people who you would assume, like, you know, people who would in 1983. If you're talking about the audience that would have been going to see like Friday the 13th sequels and things like that, who would have been, like, you know, let's say they were in their late teens, early 20s. They were, you know, born in the 60s. A lot of them would not have seen Psycho.
Sure.
particularly given the fact that of like the availability of films like at the time as well.
Absolutely. So I like that. We mentioned it in relation to Twin Peaks on our very first episode, and I was keen on that reading. I know you weren't so heavily invested, but like the difficulties of returning to something years and years later and working that into the premise of your film. So I think it's interesting in itself before we even get into any of its strengths or merits. Yeah. But what kind of took me is how strong this film is on its own terms as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned it's how indebted it is, or its story is, to Psycho, but I don't think it is in a way that, say, The Two Jakes was to Chinatown that we covered a few episodes ago. So he has a question.
You need the bare presence, the bare premise of Psycho to understand what's going on here, and you're given that in exposition. So they don't. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like in terms of The Two Jakes gradually revealing itself to be like very emotionally and psychologically dependent on the viewer's not only memory of but connection with the events of the first film. You don't really. I think you could understand this without, because this opens. It even opens with the.
It opens with the killing from the first film.
It opens with the killing, of Marion Crane. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it. I mean, so we've got 40.
So you had a question?
Yeah. So sorry, my question was related to The Two Jakes. Do you think this is a stronger sequel to Psycho than The Two Jakes was to Chinatown?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's more interesting. Yeah, I mean, I prefer the film in itself, obviously, but
sure.
In terms of its relation to and how it sort of deals with, sort of anticipates what any viewer coming into Psycho 2 is going to expect in 1983, and then plays with that and kind of toys with the viewer in a way that is very Hitchcockian, and the director Richard Franklin, I think, does a really good job of not. I mean, he's obviously the type of director who's very influenced by Hitchcock anyway.
Sure.
I've seen the film that he made before this, Road Games, with Jamie Lee Curtis, which is like a weird Australian road movie serial killer thing that's also really, really good.
Right.
But I think he does a really good job stylistically of making this feel like a kind of a continuing in the formal spirit of Hitchcock.
Yeah, I mean, let's get to the killings, shall we?
Sure.
So 40 minutes in, Toomey is killed.
Yeah.
Did you read Toomey's name as in like there's two of me? It's just such an odd name, It's one that I haven't really come across before. And I whatever. Anyway, just I thought.
Oh, sorry. You just reminded me when speaking of Dennis Franz. Robert Bloch wrote a sequel to Psycho that the studio hated. And one of the key differences between Hitchcock's film and the original novel is Norman Bates. Like the Norman Bates character in the novel is much more like a Dennis Franz type,
right?
than an Anthony Perkins type. So it's funny to see Dennis Franz in that, like, actually occupying that space in the motel, like behind the desk, But yeah, Dennis Franz he plays a horrible character in this.
Yeah, because one of the large points that I was going to make earlier was that, like my sort of sympathy with Bates, with Norman's sort of predicament upon release is heightened by this Toomey character who sort of harasses him in public, and there's that whole. So when he's behind when he's in the kitchen in the diner, and you've got that rotating orders slip thing, and there's a slip attached to that, which implies, it's a message that's directed to Norman.
Yeah,
it's the first point at which in the film I was thinking, okay, is this in his mind or isn't it?
Right,
Has it been placed there by a staff member? Has it been placed there somehow by Toomey? Is Norman imagining it? Because the film makes a point of not telling us.
Yeah, because
really
there's a whole commotion where he gets into a fight, he gets into a sort of a confrontation with Toomey, and when he abruptly leaves the kitchen, he also accidentally splashes hot oil on the owner's arm, and there's a whole commotion around it, and in that commotion the note is lost. But even when I was rewatching it, I couldn't remember. I was thinking, does he have hallucinations in it? I couldn't remember. The note says something to the effect of, "Don't let that whore stay in my house another night. Love, Mother."
Yeah.
It's referring to Mary, who spent the night in the house. The reason that she spent the night in the house was because of Toomey having turned all the cabins into, hookup spots for local teenagers.
Sure.
Norman finds like leftover kind of like drug paraphernalia in one of the rooms, and he doesn't want Mary to stay there.
And
so
yet
she stays in the house.
And yet Perkins's line delivery suggests a harmful intent there, right? That he's having to kind of either grapple with or restrain. I love that when she says, "Do you have a knife?" And he goes, "No, I don't. Yeah. I'm afraid I don't." But there's a very slight very slight pause between afraid and I don't.
Yeah.
It's a really, really terrific performance, really nuanced, intelligent performance from Perkins.
And he gets to play, like, and this comes back to the way that the film plays on audience expectations based on Psycho's legacy. So the nature of Norman Bates in Psycho is played for shock. It's a shock reveal.
Yeah.
In this, because we come into it already knowing, we get this much more. This is why I compare it to films like Deranged and things like that are like close-up character studies of these like disturbed individuals. Not an accident that both of these are based on Ed Gein, but he gets to play it very, very differently. He gets to play it in a much more complex way. Like it's a much more psychologically complex performance from Perkins this time. He gets that opportunity, like, not to cast aspersions on his performance in the first one, but that's just not what the first one was. And he gets to play. He also gets to play Norman aggressively as well. There's an aggression there and a visible sort of conflict that isn't visible to us in the first one because they have to play their cards so close.
Yeah, sure. And a relatable, plausible aggression as well in reaction to people just taunting him. Toomey's like stabbed in the face, in the head, kind of turns, and then we get a shot of the knife, and then a shot of his face, which is a prosthetic. Really well done. And
that's the area of the film, as well as also like the nudity, that is very kind of playing to 1980s teen slasher audiences.
And then 11 minutes later, there's kind of two teen lovers break their way into the cellar of the motel.
Of the house. Of
the house, sorry.
Yeah.
And it's maybe my favorite shot of the film. It's the creepiest like Mother. We don't know who Mother is at that point, but she's where we become aware of her making her way towards these kids. They hear her, but then like kind of dismiss it. The female of this couple, she manages to get outside, and he's on his way. Her boyfriend is on his way out of the cellar through the kind of cellar window. And there's that sort of over-the-shoulder shot, which is my favourite in the film, of Mother, the silhouette of Mother with a knife in hand, just like sort of scurrying, creeping towards him. It's so powerful. Yeah,
it's good.
But then, like, by the time the survivor of that attack, the lass, by the time she sort of like reports it, everything's been cleaned up. So there's no body to investigate. There's no crime scene to investigate. It's like that's another was like a point of kind of confusion when I was watching it, because we're not sure as to how much the police are aware of things that are happening.
Yeah, I think the film feels so perfectly balanced to me. Like the time that we spend with each of the characters, the time given to the investigation, and the way that the investigation is kind of it's a kind of a conflicted one, where the police chief, he's aware of like Norman's past and everything like that, but he also has this like sympathy for him. But his investigation he's kind of being driven by Lila Loomis, who is single-mindedly pursuing Norman's
and yet his sort of would-be investigation is thwarted by Mary, who out of, at this point, I thought out of naivety, kind of just gives Norman an alibi, just saying like, oh, well, he couldn't have been, he was asleep or something.
Because there is that. I remember I even when I started watching it again, I had even forgotten the first twist that she's actually Lila's daughter, and I was kind of suspending my disbelief at the idea that she would even spend the night with this guy in this house. It's like, because but then you realize, okay, well, because there is a point, like the scene you mentioned where he says he doesn't have a knife, and she goes, oh, I'm sure you do. Like people usually leave something behind, and then she opens the drawer and there's a kitchen knife in there, and she takes it out and hands it to him, and he hovers the blade over her sandwich and turns it, and it like glimmers in the light.
But she says as well,
she looks at him really uneasily and says, "Is everything okay?" And he, struggles and like cuts the sandwich.
But then she reveals that she knows about his past anyway, because I think Mrs. Spools at the diner warned her.
No, she doesn't reveal that she knows that all she knows is that he killed his mother.
Oh, killed his mother
by poisoning.
Yeah.
But of course, she does know. She does, and that breaks her like that whole like friendly kind of performance thing. She is genuinely scared of him in that moment.
Yeah,
and thinking about backing out. And like, I'm not going to like. She's there because her mother wants her to be there, but she doesn't really feel comfortable there.
One of the funniest lines in the film. So we've talked about like the ambiguity in terms of like whose mother, who's doing the killings, is Norman hallucinating? Is when Norman becomes convinced, even though we know at this point that he hasn't. I think, if I remember rightly. He mentions, after I killed that kid in the cellar, and the way he just delivers it, he's just convinced that he did it. It's like, oh god,
it's initially it sounds like a reveal, like he's admitting it, and then you realize that he's not admitting it. He's just assuming that must be what happened. It's very good.
So funny.
I just love, like, I think it kind of it there's a dark comic. I mean, there isn't in the original as well, but there's like a dark comedy kind of streak through it as well, where it's like it becomes this like darkly comic sequence of different characters adopting the mother persona, and everybody's confused about who's mother, and like she's there but she's not there.
Yeah.
And that the fact that presence in absence is I think given a really beautiful, surreal kind of symbolic expression when Norman comes home at one point and he looks over in the corner of his living room, and there's this like weird Twin Peaks-esque light flare that comes up behind the sofa. It just comes up and it dies away and it's never referred to again. It's a really weird touch that I really liked. But okay, so the film, let's get to the ending with Emma Spool.
Yeah. Old Spoolie.
So Spoolie shows up. She's okay. So the comic sequence of everybody becoming mother and like all this kind of stuff culminates in Mary going down to the basement and getting the mother costume and coming up because Norman is on the phone to somebody who he says is mother,
on the phone to Dr. Bill,
right, and he's having a conversation with mother on the phone. So she comes up and stands in front of him and says, tries to override the mother on the phone by being his mother in body, and then that doesn't work. So she goes upstairs and calls him from the extension and tells him to hang up the phone. And then we find out that Lila Loomis has been murdered and her body is concealed under the coal in the cellar. And Mary discovers this and then assumes that Norman must have done it, so Norman must be mother. And at this point, the police come in and Mary is holding the knife and they shoot her. Okay, so that's the end of that story. So Lila and Mary are both dead.
Yeah.
And Norman is cleared. So they assume that all the people who were killed by Lila and Mary, and that Anyway, so that's the end of that, and Norman is cleared of all charges and he's left alone. And at that point, Emma Spool turns up and tells him that she's actually his real mother.
Yeah.
At this point, all of the mayhem and confusion has completely destabilized Norman's mind, and he kills this woman who has just shown up and confessed to him that she's his real mother.
Yeah.
And he basically ends up back at square one. He has his mother's corpse up in the bedroom. He's running the motel, and that's what I loved about this though, is that like it's basically a reboot, right? So it's like it takes this very circuitous kind of like route around to restoring the situation that prevailed at the beginning of the original film, that Norman is living with the corpse of his mother.
Yeah,
and
I mean, it could be like
it retcons the original and says that wasn't his real mother. This is his real mother. So it's like,
that could be. It could also be like the real spoiler of this is that could be like a prequel, but for Perkins's visible age.
Right, yeah.
Like a bit like Final Destination 5.
Yeah.
But the moment at which he thwacks Spool on the back of the head with a shovel, though, is really cathartic. Because he's been at the mercy of everyone's machinations for the whole film, and this is the one thing that he does that seems to be like his own, course of action.
Gets him back to where he wants to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I just wanted to talk about Psycho 3. Now I know you haven't seen Psycho 3, so I don't know how much you want me to tell you about it.
Tell me everything. Tell me everything you've got.
Okay, so it picks up 1 month after the events of Psycho 2,
right?
And it's set. So it has this Norman living with Mother. His personality split between Norman and Mother, running the motel and so on. But as you said, it opens with an extended Vertigo homage with the bell tower. The protagonist is a suicidal ex-nun who is named Maureen. I forget her surname, but it begins with a C, so her initials are MC, as in Marion Crane. And she leaves after a suicide attempt that results in another nun falling to her death. She's thrown out of the church and she has nowhere to go. She ends up staying the night in the room that Marion Crane stayed in. She bears a striking resemblance to Marion Crane. She has the suitcase that says MC on it. And that triggers this weird kind of thing in Norman, this discomfort and but it has an amazing, there's a lot of people don't like Psycho 3 that much. I really, really like it. I think it's a really interesting film. And as I said, it's kind of a counterpoint to Psycho 2 because Psycho 2 takes this, as I said, takes this circuitous route back to being a kind of a reboot, whereas Psycho 3 is kind of like a quasi remake. It's like it has this sort of interest in revisiting a lot of the iconography of the original film, and playing with it. And there's a sequence where she's staying in the same cabin that Marion stayed in. Maureen is, and Norman, Mother rather, has had enough of this whore staying in this cabin and this temptress, so she goes down to murder her, and she walks into the bathroom. Maureen is in the bath, pulls back the shower curtain just like in the original film with the knife, but Maureen has already slit her wrists in the tub. And as she's bleeding out, the image of Mother with the knife appears to her as the Virgin Mary with a crucifix. And there's this whole it's so cool. And
right. I mean, don't tell me that much.
Okay, well, all right. Do you want me to? I can hold off. I don't need to. I mean,
I do plan to watch it. I mean, I did enjoy Psycho 2, to the point where I have a genuine interest in 3, as a film. So maybe,
okay.
Maybe.
All right, I won't.
Okay,
I won't go any further. I just.
Do you think Psycho 3 is? I mean, you mentioned it it might be read as a quasi remake of the first one. Do you think
more like a commentary on it takes a little bit like The Force Awakens is A New Hope or something like that.
Okay, so do you think it's a better film in that regard than Gus Van Sant's shot-for-shot remake of Psycho?
Yeah, definitely. It's way better. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
I don't mind Van Sant's film. I think it's fine. I think it's kind of interesting on its own terms, but it also it feels kind of redundant to me. I would rank the series 1, 2, 3, 5, 4. With 5 being the remake.
So 4's, you're not a fan of 4 in any way?
It's okay.
Okay.
But just not a great premise. Just like like as I said, once you remove the split personality, tending to Mother's corpse and all this kind of thing from the film, it ceases to really be a horror film and it becomes a kind of a dark psychological drama about child abuse, essentially.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't sound great.
Okay, I won't go into any more details. Just to suffice to say about Psycho 3, there are a number of other twists that are very dependent on the twists that we already got in the second one, and it yeah.
Okay.
And it also gets into Norman's head in a different way than the second one does. They go together really well. It's not quite as stylishly directed as the second one, but I think Anthony Perkins does a good job with it, and the character of Maureen is good. I'm really, really fond of Psycho 3 as well. Okay, we move on to the next one. So our third film.
What would you give out of 10? This?
I'd give it a 9.
Yeah. Maybe a high 7 for me. Which,
okay.
Yeah, 1 star. Yeah, now let's move on to A History of Violence.
So how's your dad?
I don't know. A little weird.
Well, after what he went through, I mean, actually killing someone? I mean, that's enough to freak anybody out.
Yeah, I guess.
This old man's some kind of tough guy, huh? What's he think of his wimp son? You think he'd take this shit? You think he'd make jokes? Go on, bitch, say something funny.
Bobby, leave him alone.
Shut up, skank. Uh-oh. He's getting mad.
Jack, let's just get out of here, okay? Jackie's an asshole, you know that. He doesn't mean shit. Let's just go. Let's just get out of here, okay?
Yeah, puss. Run away. Goddamn, I bet your dad'd be real shamed by you. Go ahead, bitch. Say something funny. Make me laugh.
Okay, you motherfucker! Get over there! Oh, you son of a bitch! Come here. Are you laughing? Are you laughing now, you motherfucking cocksucking piece of shit?
So, A History of Violence, directed by David Cronenberg, written by Josh Olson, adapted from a 1997 graphic novel by John Wagner and Vince Locke, produced by Chris Bender and J.C. Spink, and distributed by New Line Cinema. The film was released in September 2005 after competing in competition at Cannes earlier that year, had a budget of $32 million and made a box office gross of $60.7 million. The synopsis focuses on Tom Stall, played by Viggo Mortensen, who lives in Millbrook, Indiana, with wife Edie, Maria Bello, son Jack, played by Ashton Holmes, and daughter Sarah, played by Heidi Hayes. As a diner owner, Tom finds himself on the wrong end of a stick-up, let's say, one afternoon when 2 out-of-town drifters decide to rob the joint with the customers and staff still inside near to closing time. When Tom unexpectedly springs into action and kills both assailants in a ruthless, efficient fashion, he garners unwanted publicity and attention from the local and national press, who hail him as a hero. Soon enough, because of such attention, Carl Fogarty, a gangster from Philadelphia, arrives in town with 2 henchmen, and he begins to harass Tom and his family, claiming to recognize Tom as one Joey Cusack, a former gang member from Philadelphia, from back home. Tom first denies this, although further harassment and threats from Fogarty force him into a second violent confrontation, which then forces him to reveal to Edie that, yes, as a local police officer suspected, he has been in the witness protection program all along. That's the sort of setup. Takes us about halfway through the film, maybe 2/3.
Wait, go back and say the last part of that again.
He's in witness protection.
Is he?
Isn't he?
I never read it that way.
Really?
No.
Should I do it again?
No, that's okay. That's all right.
Well, because the local cop presumes that he is in some kind of witness protection program, right? Because
he does,
this sort of unwanted presence in town from gangster Ed Harris, obviously makes the cop think, well, who is this guy? How has he just murdered 2 robbers in his diner in such a ruthless manner? maybe he is who they say he is, and how did he get here? And
I know that the sheriff presumes that if what Fogarty and co are saying about Tom is true, then that must mean that Tom is a gangster who's in witness protection. But I never read it that way because of the way that Tom talks about it,
right?
Which is part of the bizarre sort of subtext of this movie, that, or not so much subtext, but the alluded to origin of Tom Stall is so strange. He what he says when he confesses to Edie is, I thought I killed Joey Cusack. I went out to the desert and I killed him. I spent 3 years becoming Tom Stall. Which is like, I went out to the desert and I killed. It's as though he spent 3 years psychically transforming himself through like sheer will into this other person. And I don't think I've never read the film as being as cut and dry as simply that he's pretending to have this different personality, but the way that he shifts in and out of being Tom and Joey and has a different way of speaking and a different even a different expression on his face, that's not as simple as like a pretense or a performance. It's something much stranger than that. And like it says, she asks about her name as well. She asks like, Stall, like, what, did you just make that up? And in the kind of obvious response to that, you would think would be that he got it from somewhere. He saw it, like, he needed the name and it was written down somewhere or whatever. His response is
in a bathroom stall.
Exactly, he was sitting on the toilet when he, so his response is just, it was available.
Yeah,
which to me sounds like he killed Tom Stall. Right,
but you see, that was the specific line that I thought. Well, he's been assigned that name from a list of options by the government. Like, okay. Which name do you want? Well, what's available? Well, Stall's available. Okay, I'll have that. That's just
okay, sure. But how do you square the witness protection theory?
No, I
think your reading of this is nonsense. No, I do think it makes completely more sense than that simple explanation that I gave in the synopsis. Because there's also the question that is it Fogarty or is it? No, it's not. It's Richie who asks him, isn't it? Yeah, it is. It's Richie, his brother, played by William Hurt.
So in the final sort of act of the film, he goes back to Philadelphia as
to confront his brother, as Joey Cusack to confront his brother.
Confront his brother,
to make peace with his brother.
Yeah,
but his brother's not interested in that.
Yeah, and in that sequence, nothing's mentioned of him like disappearing with the help of the government.
No, nothing like that. No.
Yeah.
He
even though he did.
In that scene, Richie asks him, "When you dream, are you still Joey?" And there was a dream sequence cut from the film where Tom and Carl Fogarty are in the diner, and Fogarty threatens to kill Tom's family, and Tom shoots him in the chest with a shotgun, and he goes flying across the bar, and when he lands on the ground, his chest is completely like blasted open. His like rib cage is open, and there's like steam coming out of the wound, and it's very, very, very reminiscent of James Woods with the orifice in his torso in Videodrome.
Oh, right.
The reason that it was cut was because Cronenberg didn't want the viewer to get inside Tom's head like that. Tom was supposed to be an enigma. That sort of, but the character is a kind of Tom Joey hybrid. It's not like it's a very kind of like Brundlefly kind of situation. Yes. It's like, it's not a. There's something deeply weird about the premise, the allusions that are made to the origin of this character.
I mean, he kind of he teases that unraveling in a way that we might expect a belated psychological sort of context to emerge. I love how the film withholds that from us. I think it's one of its key strengths. When I first watched this, I wasn't sure if I was allowed to like it to the extent that I did, because it was pulpy, it was fast, it was lean, it didn't take too long to explain itself, it didn't feel heavy thematically, even though now I think on a second viewing it kind of, is in many ways, but on another level it, just kind of flies by in that Cronenbergian fashion. In the years since 2005, I've very much become a Cronenberg fan in a way that I perhaps wasn't in 2005 when I was in love with Godard.
Godard, man, and
I thought every kind of cinematic tool that you had at your disposal had to be like reminding you of the fact that it was a cinematic tool. Obviously, there's completely different. A point in the spectrum to occupy. But how does this sit for you in Cronenberg's filmography? Because I know you're a huge Cronenberg fan.
I was at the time that it came out. This would have been the first Cronenberg film that I looked forward to as a Cronenberg film.
Yeah.
So, and I actually was. I mean, I liked it, but I was a little bit disappointed in the same way that a lot of fans of Cronenberg's more sort of, signature work is are in relation to his later sort of output, and I think that is sort of when you think back on the way that the film was received at Cannes, which was very positively, that kind of like there was a kind of auteurist kind of prejudice that was like heavily informing and constricting the critical readings of the film.
I get it, yeah.
And and that kind of approach to the film has over the years caused me to not like vacillate wildly on how I see it, but like just a little bit kind of feel a little bit on the fence about whether the film is a little bit too subtext heavy. Because a lot of the coverage of the film, a lot of the commentary on it was like all about like, what is Cronenberg really doing with this material? Like, what's he really getting at here? Like the idea that it couldn't just be a thriller. There had to be something. There had to be something in there.
That's what I mean about like not sure if I was allowed to like it to the degree that I did.
Yeah. So there's this issue of like the triple entendre of the title. That I think Roger Ebert talked about. That it was like, a person with a history of violence, like society with a history of violence, and like the history of the representations of violence in the cinema or whatever. Like, because a lot of it is it's a very kind of like apple pie sort of Americana that's presented in the movie. Like the scene at the beginning where the two gangsters who Tom ends up killing when they kill the people in the motel, which is actually the motel that was used in Existence as well.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And the bar that he goes to in Philly at the end is the bar that Jeff Goldblum has his arm wrestling in The Fly.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. Because obviously, like, Cronenberg shoots all his movies around Toronto, so these locations get recycled. But anyway, the scene ends with one of the gangsters shooting a little girl, and then it cuts to Tom's daughter waking up from a nightmare. And apparently a lot of people thought that it was actually a dream, and Cronenberg is like, well, if that's the case, then that's my fault, because you're certainly not supposed to. But it has, I like that it has that kind of ambiguous kind of thing, like, not that you're meant to take it literally as a dream, but that it is kind of like this Freudian thing, like it's like the return of the repressed kind of thing, like it's this life of like gangsters and murderers is going to bubble up out of this like picket fence kind of idealized vision of American kind of suburbia.
I mean, I like the idea that that it takes these two gangsters it takes two sort of out of towners to bring that violence to that town, as if like this idyllic existence is keeping him as Tom Stall.
Yeah, well, it's a very
comical in a way.
It's a very Western kind of. It's like it is kind of like a neo-Western with the gunslingers who blow in and challenge. Hear tell of this guy who they come to challenge him or whatever. But So I enjoyed the movie, but I definitely was one of those people who wanted, like, if that deleted scene had been in the film, I would have been very happy with that one.
Okay.
That kind of way, but I think the same thing happened with Eastern Promises straight afterwards, where they really had to bend over backwards with that one because that didn't have the weird subtext that this has. So you got a lot of commentary about like, Cronenberg's obsession with the body and the way that these Russian gangsters have tattoos on their knees, and the kind of the bizarre, like almost intimate way that the knife fight is staged, like they're naked and that kind of thing. It's like penetrating each other and all this kind of stuff. Like, if any other director had made the exact same film, those themes would never have been teased out of it. It was like pure sort of like, we're coming to this with this notion of like, this is a Cronenberg film, so it must deal with these themes. It must
Sure.
explore these ideas, and we're going to find them in here. Like you could go and take any film by anybody, and you could find like quote unquote bodily themes in there, and Cronenbergian themes in any film by anyone ever. So it's just, I remember that was the point where I kind of just went, look, he's just not making films like that anymore. Because do you remember that the film that he was going to make after A History of Violence was called Painkillers?
Yeah.
And it was like, it focused on a radical performance artist with an unusually high tolerance for pain, who's like tasked with searching for this like group of subversives who are like it's set in the near future. Like, it was Nicolas Cage was attached to it at one point. I think Ralph Fiennes was attached as well. And it was supposed to be like he goes into this underground world of like performance artists who perform surgeries on themselves as a form of entertainment. And there was also something about like people using their internal organs to have sex and this kind of stuff. So it was like pure Cronenberg material, but he decided not to do it. And that project, along with probably Alejandro Jodorowsky's King's Shot, are the two projects that I was most heartbroken about not coming to fruition. But his novel Consumed, that was published in 2014, he started writing that right after A History of Violence, and those themes are in Consumed. Like, Consumed is pure Cronenberg. And all that stuff about like performance artists and like the performance artist who's like kills and eats her husband and all this kind of all that stuff. It's like he decided, look, I'm not going to make movies like that anymore, but I'm going to put all of those themes and ideas into the novel.
I wonder the extent to which that was like a practical thing. Like, he just felt like cinema just doesn't lend justice anymore to that kind of vision, where and the kind of fights, the ongoing battles that a director, even Cronenberg, has to kind of go through in order to get their vision on screen. I
mean, I definitely think A History of Violence was a conscious turn to the mainstream for him, because he had to give up his salary to get Spider produced. So he didn't get paid. He didn't get paid to make Spider. Neither did Ralph Fiennes or Gabriel Byrne.
What's the most recent Cronenberg film for you that feels like signature Cronenberg, if we may use that term? Existence? Yeah. I ask with a question mark.
Yeah, Existence.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's not the most recent Cronenberg film that I like, but it's the last one that has when you think of Cronenberg and the kind of biomorphic imagery that he became known for, and it's really, really Existence. But
anyway, we've got some. Sorry,
the novel though. The reason that he gave at the time that he wasn't going to make Painkillers was that he read the script after several years. It was originally in development in the late 90s. He read it and he thought, I've kind of done it already. He said he was bored with himself. But if he was then taking those exact things and putting them into Consumed, and he spent 8 years working on Consumed, he can't have been that bored with himself. So,
well, it's different. It's a different realm, though, right? To go from
translating
I guess
maybe
to screen.
He wanted to explore
that's a challenge in itself. Anyway, to return to A History of Violence, we do have some very, very graphic imagery here, though. Not biomorphic in the way that you mentioned, but so the scene in which Tom springs into action in the diner out of nowhere, a very wonderfully cathartic sequence for me, because these guys have been portrayed, as you said in the opening sequence, as absolute lowlives, horrible murderers. They enter the diner. There's this kind of Western standoff, as you mentioned. Tom, springs into action, kills one guy, shoots Leyland Jones, is it? I think the character's called, played by Steve McCarthy. And that's it for him. Good night, Vienna. But we've got a lovely, lovely close-up of his face on the floor, kind of just mangled.
Yeah.
Properly nice.
Yeah. There's some good gore.
Yeah.
And then also the standoff outside of Tom's house when he drives the guy's nose bone into his brain.
Oof.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then also in the house at the end when he stamps on the guy's throat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently both of those are slightly censored in the American version. There's like less blood.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ironic.
To get the R rating, I guess. But
yeah, I guess so. What do you make of the sort of two sex scenes in the film?
Yeah, a lot of hay was made about those two.
With regard to like them being
Cronenbergian, yeah. Okay. So that they were kind of latched onto as like you have they sort of there's a Tom scene and a Joey scene sort of and they represent, and one of them is this kind of like fantasy straight out of like American pop culture, the cheerleader fantasy
that's initiated by Edie.
By Edie,
right? Yeah.
And then the second one is the one that there was questions over, like, is it a rape scene or isn't it? Cronenberg says absolutely categorically it isn't.
I mean, there's a key moment where like it's violent. I mean, it's violent it's aggressive makeup sex, right?
It's not. Yeah, I agree. It's not a rape scene.
And there's a key moment in it where Edie kind of kisses Tom. Like without resisting in any way.
He's about to end it, and she pulls him into her.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like they're interesting. And again, they're sort of they're part of what has made me sort of wonder if it's a little bit too subtext heavy, if it's a little bit too much like gesturing at its own.
See, you don't have to worry about these things when you think that Tom is in witness protection. But I think this is a film also about performance in some way. So the idea that Tom's performing his life. See that of course, credence is that's it lends credence to that reading. If you take it as a not kind of like a personality disorder thing, but like a kind of more straightforward witness protection thing, is that like he's performing this life, but he has to perform him as a husband, as a father, as a diner owner, as a person in this community, and I like that kind of extends itself to questions of identity in general and who we are, and the hierarchies of power and therefore violence that are established in the film as well. So you've got like his relationship with his son, Jack, played by Ashton Holmes. Like, because there's that scene, isn't there, where Jack's being kind of harassed by a school bully frequently, and then only after the fact that his dad's made the national news with this expression of violence, does he, I suppose, feel inwardly confident of lashing out himself against this bully. And so I read that as a sort of a commentary on how we sort of elect to perform within social sort of power structures.
Yeah. The films that Cronenberg made following this led to his the broadening of the definition of Cronenbergian from just referring to kind of squishy body horror, like medical body horror, like medicine gone wrong generally, to identity. So like it's like the broadest theme, like identity.
Sorry, did I commit a faux pas and a red flag?
No, you're not wrong in that the film is about identity, but in terms of like films about identity, I mean, like,
yeah, what is it?
Like that's as broad as it gets, So like you can't say that like identity is Cronenbergian, but
the
idea
for the record, I didn't.
No. Of course not.
Yeah.
But like the fact that this film is about identity is not special. Do you know what I mean? So
sure.
Like the idea that like Eastern Promises also has this thing about like the double identity, and then like you have A Dangerous Method, which is all about like the life of the mind, and anyway, that was sort of the way that auteurist critics kind of reconciled themselves to Cronenberg's changing tastes and interests.
I got two more things to say. One is an extension of that bullying scene that I just mentioned, because I have problems frequently with scenes of bullying in cinema. I think bullying's extremely difficult to cinematize and dramatize, because often its effects are internal, right? And often it's often not dramatic either, right? It doesn't actually always result in somebody visibly or physically or audibly saying something to somebody else in order to belittle them, right? It can happen for all kinds of reasons. This is a film that kind of does go down that cliched path, ostensibly, of having the bully being very much like that, but it also counters it with a very cathartic moment in which Jack does fight back. And I always like to see, if bullying is going to take place on screen, I always like to see the bully get his comeuppance, because it is usually a he. And the second thing I was going to say is, extending from the idea of performance, just how good is Viggo Mortensen in this film?
Yeah, he's great.
I think he's really, absolutely amazing.
Really amazing. I am not a huge fan of the B plot with Jack and Bobby the bully.
Yeah.
It's just another one of those things where it's like, okay, it's another thing that contributes to me thinking, or having thought in the past at least, that the film is too caught up in its own subtext, in the commentary on violence and American culture that it's having, and I've gone back and forth over the years as to whether I find that element appealing or not, and also whether I find the ambiguities and the kind of the opacities around the Joey Tom hybrid to be sort of confounding in a satisfying way, or to be like missed opportunities for something more, I don't know, but it's certainly an interesting film with a lot of layers.
But and yet, adapted from a graphic novel as well. Not to say that graphic novels aren't serious medium at all, but like it's very pulpy. My understanding is that it's quite different as it progresses as well. It does deviate from the source output, which I haven't read. But it feels like it has this sort of non-stop sort of energy where, see, I don't disagree with you when you say it's like subtext heavy, but it has a way of unfolding in which it's supremely satisfying on a scene-to-scene level.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah.
And so I never don't enjoy it.
No, I really like the film.
It's a very sort of cathartic sort of film for me.
I'm just saying that the when you take all of the different components of the film, you take the ambiguity around Joey Tom, and then you take the two sex scenes, and you take the B plot about the bully, and you take the the use of like Americana and everything like that. The way that those things all connect together thematically feels a little bit too subtextual, if you know what I mean. A little bit too much like a pointed commentary, and I don't know.
And yet, see, I don't think it's pointed commentary, because I don't really feel that it's didactic in any way.
No. But that's exactly what I mean when I say that I've gone back and forth as to whether its ambiguities are like when I try to connect the dots around all of these different elements, whether I'm satisfied by the strange route I have to take to connect them all.
Yeah, it's maybe what I meant as well, in a different way, when I said, I don't know if I'm meant to enjoy this in the way that I am, or to the extent that I do.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I think what we're both saying is that it feels very much like deconstruction. Like there's definitely like a self-reflexive kind of element to it. Yeah. Okay.
Do you like it more than Eastern Promises?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I think it's a much more interesting film than Eastern Promises.
I need to rewatch that.
I think Eastern Promises is pretty good, but hugely overrated. I think it's Cronenberg's most overrated film.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I think that it feels like in fact, it feels a little bit like a pilot episode to a TV series or something, the way that it ends.
Yeah.
It feels like we've just gotten to the point where the story is kind of like set up and ready to go, and then it ends. Which, when I saw it in the cinema, the guy behind me expressed a similar sentiment when it just faded to black and he went, shit ending.
Oh, wow. So History of Violence out of 10, what would you give it?
I give it an 8.
Yeah, 8 for me. Solid 8. High 8. Whatever. 2 stars. Okay. Alright, shall we move on to Phoenix?
Weißt du, was mich wirklich anwidert? Wir Juden haben geschrieben, gesungen und malocht. Manche sind für Deutschland in den Krieg gezogen. Und die einen wie die anderen wurden vergast. Und jetzt kommen die Überlebenden zurück und verzeihen. Die Gaskammern hören auf zu arbeiten und wir verzeihen. Jede Feigheit, jeden Verrat. Ich spiele das nicht mit, Nelly. Helene, ich weiß, dass sie liebt. Ich glaube nicht, dass sie verraten hat. Weißt du, Nelly, als du davor in so einem Dunkeln gesessen hast, habe ich für einen Moment gedacht, du hättest ihn erschossen und bräuchtest Hilfe. Ganz ehrlich, es wäre mir lieber gewesen.
So Phoenix, final film this episode, directed by Christian Petzold, written by him with Haroon Farocki, produced by Florian Kerner von Gustav and Michael Weber, and released in Germany, it's a German production, released in Germany September 2014. Focuses on Nellie Lenz, played by Nina Hoss, a Jewish former cabaret singer and Holocaust survivor who returns to Berlin shortly after World War II, having recently undergone facial reconstruction following a bullet wound incurred in the concentration camp. In Berlin, Nellie searches for her non-Jewish husband, Johnny, played by Ronald Zerfeld, and when she does finally find him, she's devastated that he doesn't recognise her. Encountering her again by chance, Johnny sees enough resemblance in Nellie, who is now referring to herself as Esther, to convince her to pretend that she's his wife, who was presumed by friends and family to be dead, to have died in the death camps. And he wants her to become his wife again, so that he can receive his wife's inheritance from other relatives' deaths in the camps. That's the premise of the film. Bobby, you haven't seen any of Christian Petzold's films previously, right?
No, this is my first one. Yeah.
Okay. Did you know much about this?
No, not at all. When you suggested it and I looked it up, I recognized the poster from when it was released.
Yeah.
But I didn't remember reading about the premise or anything like that. So
it's Petzold's most recent film, other than the one that premiered in Berlin a few months ago, Transit, and it received much critical acclaim. I came in with Petzold kind of round about the point at which this was released. I saw Barbara, the film he made before this, again with Nina Hoss, which is set post-war divided Germany also, and in recent days actually, I've been revisiting those films. I watched Transit in Berlin. I've been watching for the first time a lot of his other features for the purposes of writing an article. And just to contextualize this somewhat, I wasn't fully on board with Phoenix when I first saw it. I felt that it was, well, for different reasons that I won't get into, but having now put myself in a position where I can read it in terms of his filmography, I see this as yet another riff on a theme that he returns to, that being
identity.
I know. Yes. And the identity in his filmography of a nation, that nation being Germany, but also in terms of the character of, I almost said the character of Phoenix, the character of Nellie. But okay, so it's identity, right? But throughout his filmography, he's playing with doubles and couples and reversals and the ironies that unfold when these kind of abstract, symbolic entities are dramatized in historical settings.
Mm-hmm.
In general, right? And his films tend to unfold in... I feel like I'm defending the film already. I don't know what you think about it. But his films unfold in an ostensibly unassuming way. They're not overly stylized to the point where his period productions... it can take a while to glean the fact that they're period. I mean, this is very much the case with Barbara, whose period details are so kind of subtle, and very much the case with Transit, which was, for budgetary reasons, shot as if it was just a contemporary set film, which the source novel isn't. But I liked it a lot. So, which is kind of all of which is to say that I really, really enjoyed this film on a second viewing, knowing kind of where it was coming from in the filmmaker's oeuvre, and what it subsequently led to with Transit. Yeah, give me a little bit of your thoughts.
Well, you mentioned like playing with doubles and double identities and things like that.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's great.
Yeah, I mean, well, so when you suggested this to me, I looked it up on Letterboxd and I read the plot synopsis, and it sounded really interesting. And let me ask you this: is this a thriller?
This is another thing with his films. So they're dramas that unfold as thrillers, I think.
So this is common to the rest of his films too?
I think so, yeah. So there's a tension that is played sort of straight. It's not stylized in a way that thrillers tend to be, if you know what I mean.
Sure, yeah. Would you describe it as an anti-thriller?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Because he tends to withhold information to a point where we get to know it on a need-to-know basis. And in fact, this film exposits its story a lot more than his other films.
Mm-hmm. Because the premise of this film, I could see... My first thought was Brian De Palma taking that premise and doing something really interesting with it. And then my second thought, and I think probably a filmmaker more likely to do it, would be somebody like Paul Verhoeven to do a World War II set, like even something like Black Book, something in that kind of tenor. So I was initially into the premise, and I thought the character was potentially pretty interesting, and I thought her friend was probably more interesting. I think her friend is probably the most interesting character in the film.
Dina, yeah,
who is a big proponent of the establishment of the Jewish ethno-state following World War II. So is it about halfway through the film maybe that we get to the point where the premise is kind of fully established, and we have Nina living with Johannes in his little apartment, going by the name Esther, and they've hatched this scheme to defraud her family and con her family out of her inheritance, or out of Nina's out of Nellie's inheritance. So it was kind of at that point that the film started to lose me, because it's completely devoid of tension, and you would think that the scenario that has been set up would be it inherently has that potential for tension and for tension and suspense. So in lieu of that, if the film is an anti-thriller that's going to withhold any of that from you, what you need in lieu of that is characters that are three-dimensional and psychologically believable. And for me, the point, I'll tell you the exact point that the film lost me was when Johannes has Nellie, practicing various things that he thinks she's going to need to be able to do to pass herself off as Nellie, or has Esther practicing these things. And one of the things is the handwriting.
Yeah.
Okay. So he he already has this woman who looks strikingly like his dead wife, and happened to actually be seeking him out at this bar that he works at. And then he presents her with a signature that she has never seen before, let alone practiced writing, and she reproduces it almost perfectly on the first try. And at that point I was like, okay, he must know that it's Nellie. He must he must know that it's Nellie, because like no like halfway intelligent person would like it. So it's not true to say that the film lost me at that point. What happened was I started to misread the film at that point because of the way it was presented.
Sure.
So I was like, okay, well, he knows, and she knows he knows, and it's this pretense. But then we have the much lauded final scene, where it's revealed that he never knew, right? And at that point, I was thinking, like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, nothing that led to this makes any sense, and to me, that just robs the like if it's not going to be a thriller, and it's going to be a drama, and it's going to be about these characters and their relationship and their motivations and how they kind of understand the situation that they find themselves in. It's just not. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't add up.
I've read some very, very strong critiques of this film over on Letterboxd. Even somebody who overall liked it liked it with reservations, or was more accepting of the film on a second viewing, like Mike D'Angelo, suggests that, you know, on a second viewing, once he knew where it was going, was able to read the film as, I think what it is, meant to be, like a kind of allegory. And so the characters become a delivery mechanism for that final scene, right? Bear with me here. I do think to read a film solely on those grounds, though, is to dismiss it. Is to dismiss a lot, sorry. I don't disagree with what you're saying in terms of, like, stretching credibility. I think his ongoing denial, especially in the second viewing, his ongoing denial in all of this unfolds as an interesting parallel to her own, because I feel more or as frustrated with Esther / Nelly as I do with Johnny / Johannes. I
agree. I think it's like the idea that she's more understandable, I think, because of the trauma that you assume that she's carrying, which is also not particularly well articulated. But sorry, go on.
No, and I just think that it's this sort of dual performance that's going on between them. Like he is, I think that's the point. He is presented with all of this evidence that she exists, that she survived, but the fact that we learn quite early that he divorced her before giving her up to the Germans, and B, that he presumes that she's dead and there's no way of coming back from that. Then he sort of trains himself. He tricks and trains himself into just denying the fact that could be a possibility, that she survived. Now, if you don't buy that conceptually, it's going to be difficult to dramatize it. But I think the second half of the film, what you felt, I also feel or felt on a first viewing with Vertigo. Right? Like that it was free of tension, that it was this really baggy kind of weird drama with thriller trappings. Subsequently, I've come to really, really admire and appreciate Vertigo. But I read this film, Phoenix, as a kind of reversal of that film.
Okay, there's a lot there. First of all, Vertigo, I think, is very different from this film in terms of its sensibility and its focus. Like there's a sexual and therefore necrophilic, as a lot of people have written, like about Vertigo, element to that story, and also a dreamlike kind of quality that's not here at all, like at all. So obviously, like in terms of the premise, there's a very obvious similarity between this and Vertigo, but I don't think the failings of this film, if the same qualities are present in Vertigo, I think contextually I don't really regard them as failings in that movie. But the other thing you were saying about, like, I read something, I can't remember who wrote it, on Letterboxd as well, about, it was a defense of the film, about, it essentially boiled down to, they know but they don't know.
That's what, yeah.
So it was like, they know on some level, which I think is kind of what you're suggesting as well. But to me, that is gesturing at an even more complex psychology than you would have to dramatize if they simply, like, if Johanna simply knew. That's less complex than knowing but not knowing. And if it's knowing but not knowing, it's just not there. It's just not dramatized. That's something that you need to
see. It's weird because I, like, on a very sort of when I was in a very interpretive frame of mind when I was watching it, you know, that sequence where he wants her to burn her arm in order to scar where he thinks where the Germans would have tattooed her. Obviously, she does have a tattoo. He's not to know that, and she goes, "Oh, you know, I'm not going to let you do that." And she storms into the bathroom, closes the door. The bathroom has a translucent window in the door, and he's able to see in, and he's able to see her, but he can't see her. So it's like seeing but not seeing, knowing but not knowing, like this weird, like, liminal space, like Phoenix itself. It's named after this bar where this identity is in, you know, this unstable, fluctuating state, as indeed Germany was at the time, in terms of, like, what it had become as a country, etc., etc. All of this is very true, and I know that you're going to say, yeah, all of this is very true, but, however, it's not, like, dramatically interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say. I think, yeah, like, the second, you know that, like, we've talked about this on previous episodes, but, like, for me, the more the acclaim around a film drifts off of the actual content of the film and onto some sort of statement or message on, like, some commentary on something, the more suspicious I become about the actual film.
Right.
You know, like, I can't remember if it actually came up or if it was off air, that we talked about Verhoeven's L, and, you know, that feeling of, like, when people talk about the film, they barely talk about the film. You know, they talk about the meaning of the film.
Yeah, we were discussing that in Dublin last year. I remember.
Right.
Like, yeah,
and the commentary that the film was making on various subjects and things like that. You know, which to me, like, if you want to make, not to say that these things should be left out of films necessarily, but they are supplementary to me. Like, film is an experiential art form. You know, if you like, if your goal is to deliver a message, and your means of doing that is to make a film, you've chosen the most labor-intensive and difficult way of doing that you possibly could. Like, it'd be much more efficient and easier to write an article.
Don't you find a film that's so predicated on the idea of performance, don't you find the performance is at least compelling? Even if the characters they're portraying aren't, like, for you, plausible psychologically.
They're initially intriguing, but I think once you get to that point where it becomes completely unclear what the sort of the like epistemological kind of position is, you know, where it's like, you know, it doesn't feel like it's really elaborated beyond the point where the premise is established, where they're living together and they've got their scheme.
It's true that none of Petzol's films seem to, like, twist in any way. They seem to be very narrow, straight, so stylistically sparse, narratively sparse, stripped down, and they sort of go from A to B, right? And they have this, like, bullet point way of, you know, delivering information. They often end very, very quickly. And I read one critique on Letterboxd that said this film is too pleased with the emotional catharsis that it delivers at the end. Like, after all of this, you know, lethargic sort of second act where we know where it's going, and, you know, so in the final scene we may as well say what it was or is. Esther, as Nellie, meets her family again, is reunited in front of them with Johannes, Johnny, her husband. They go and, they sit down to chat and catch up, and then they go inside Johnny goes on piano and she goes to sing a song, and she sings one verse of the song, barely kind of able to vocalize. Second one, belts out this number that's so beautiful and so immediately recognizable to Johnny that he looks up and sees on her arm the tattoo that she's been inscribed with in the concentration camps. At that moment, he realizes that Nellie is actually Nellie. She finishes a song, he stopped playing by that point, and she walks out, and we're left with this out-of-focus shot where she's left the building. Now, I don't read that as a kind of cathartic ending, right? Okay, I know that he gets a sort of comeuppance, right? In some sort of way. She's leaving there. She has no friends. She has no family. She's left with nothing. I don't see that as kind of cathartic in a way that is full and truthful and meaningful.
Yeah. I found there's a scene where she actually, there are two scenes, I think, where she comes back to the apartment that she's temporarily sharing with Nina, and sits on Nina's bed in the dark and tells her about like how her relationship with Johnny is progressing and so on. And Nina expresses like a profound disappointment in Nellie's desire to forgive, and that's not true. Not desire to forgive, because Nellie hasn't accepted that there's anything to forgive. Her desire, well, I suppose from Nina's point of view, that's kind of how she perceives it. That Nellie is willing to forgive and forget Johnny's collaboration with the Nazis.
Yeah.
And sending her to a concentration camp. That scene, Nina says to her, for a second I thought that you were going to tell me that you had shot him and you needed my help.
Yep.
And I would have preferred that. And I would have preferred that. Right?
Really?
I mean, that's kind of where I thought it was going, that there was going to be some sort of revenge plot.
Yeah.
And I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be, of course, but
so the point at which Nellie...
I wish there was something else in the second act, either it was psychologically convincing and thereby it was dramatically engrossing, or it would lean into the thriller element more. But like for me, particularly the second act was just a complete wash, and that meant that the third act and the cathartic final scene, which I also think it's a kind of lazy ending, isn't it?
Do you think?
Just wandering at the door.
I think the last 10 minutes are the best thing Petzold's done.
Right, but it's kind of so, it's so reliant on the previous investment in that. Like for me at the end, that final scene, I just sort of thought, wow, this could have been really powerful if I had found the film dramatically convincing up to that point. I also don't like the way that Nina is written out of the movie. She kills herself. Like it kind of like feels like hand waving.
Yeah, well, she kills herself because she says in her letter to Nellie that they've spoken about how it's difficult to go back, but then she can't see any way of going forward. Which actually released at the same time as this, or similar time, was Ida, the Pavel Pawlikowski film, which has a similar sort of vibe to it, although from a very Polish perspective. And rewatching this film recently, Phoenix, I was reminded of that.
But the thing is, like, it's established at the beginning of the film that Nina does have a vision of where to go. She wants to move to Palestine.
On the grounds that Nellie's going to join her there.
Right,
then once they get to Berlin, Nellie's like, well, let's go find my husband. Oh, wow, I found him, but he doesn't recognize me, but I'm going to pursue him anyway.
Yeah,
and Selena,
it just seems a little bit, again, a little bit unconvincing. I don't get the feeling from Nina that, I mean, like, put it this way: if Nellie had died in the camps, would Nina still have killed herself?
Maybe she'd have returned and married Johnny. Who knows?
I don't get that feeling from Nina. I don't get that. Like Nina's not. From my understanding, Nina is not singularly focused on Nellie. Like she's going through lists of names and she's trying to find all of these people, like looking at photographs and things like that, and is very ideologically committed to the establishment of Israel. So I don't know. To me, that was just like, we don't need her anymore. That's not, and we'll use her. We'll use that character in a purely kind of symbolic way. I did like the line. I like the line. I feel more drawn to our dead than our living. That was quite a beautiful line. But
I mean, it's also her letter that in which she includes the documentation that convinces Nellie that her husband divorced her as well. So it's her death's used as a plot device, because it's that point that convinces Nellie, oh, okay, this is, my husband did betray me. And then we go into the final scene.
Let me ask you about that scene that you mentioned where Johnny says that they need to burn, or burn or cut or whatever it is that the tattoo, like, or not sorry, to burn the area of the arm where the tattoo would have been, so that Esther can say, oh, I burned it off or whatever. I want to get rid of it. She pushes past him into the bathroom and locks the door, and we see her in the bathroom reading the divorce papers and everything, and we see Johnny in the room just kind of waiting and kind of like looking through the glass, and then we just cut to the next scene. So as far as Johnny knows, Esther does not have a tattoo, and they're still going ahead with the plan. So like, why? Surely nothing has changed. Surely he still thinks that they're going to want to see her tattoo. So when they go to dinner, he still thinks that she has no tattoo and that there's a chance that they're going to be found out. So why shouldn't he have continued to pressure her?
Has she, like, how do we know that she hasn't, in the ellipsis, burned an arm?
So she burned the other arm. I mean,
would
you assume that? I mean,
I don't know. Like,
I think it's strange, because it again calls into question, like, does he know or doesn't he know? Because, yeah.
What would you give out of 10?
I give it a 5.
Oh, fucking hell. Do you think this is a better film than 36th Precinct that we discussed a few episodes back, which was also my suggestion?
Well, I gave that one a 3, so.
Oh, oh wow. We're getting better. No, we always seem to end the episodes with like some kind of downer from your end. I like this film a lot. I'm going to say this is like a high 7 that's taken into an 8 in its final 10 minutes. But then, I completely understand where you're coming from with regard to the reservations that you have. I also share your demands from a film going into it for those kinds of things. But from this film, I get that. I find the performances convincing enough. There's loads and loads contained in Nina Hoss, and delivered from her and given, and also from Ronald Zerfeld. I like it a lot. It's not Petzold's best film. I think the one that you should maybe watch next is The State I Am In, which was his first feature, which has a similarly elliptical vibe, but it's much more thriller-esque.
Okay. All right.
Should we wrap it up?
Will we wrap it up there?
All right.
Okay, that's it for this episode of The Habitus. Follow us on Twitter at habituspod, and we're all over your iTunes and your
Stitcher,
Stutter, and your Twitcher, and your
SoundCloud,
all of them.
Are we on YouTube yet, Bobby?
Not yet. No, I'm having some problems with that one. But
wow.
Okay, I've been Bobby Lowe. He's been
Michael Pattison,
and this has been The Habitus. Thank you.
Cheers.